Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Rae. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're new to the show, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, and be sure to click subscribe so you never miss an episode from me. So, guys, today we're going to get into a case that is, oh my God, it's just so frustrating, so upsetting. And a lot of you probably have heard of it, especially if you follow true crime news or current cases. And this one has been requested a ton from all of you, so I definitely wanted to get into it today. It's the case of Suzanne Simpson, a Texas mom of 4 who disappeared. And it is believed that she is most likely no longer with us. And to this day, her remains have not been found, which has definitely made things very challenging. And like I said, I got a ton of requests to cover the case, and oftentimes when there is a new and breaking case, I tend to wait until there is enough information to cover it to the best of my ability with what is out there. And an affidavit did drop in December, and we got a ton new information. Plus, the trial starts in 2 weeks. So I feel like now is a good time to cover it and get you guys caught up on everything in case you want to follow along with the trial. I do want to warn you, and I don't know if you can tell in my voice already, but I am getting over a pretty gnarly cold. I have a terrible cough, but I really still wanted to record today while this is fresh in my head. I'm very fired up. I'm very angry and eager to share the details of this case with you guys so that you have this information before the trial begins, unless it gets delayed. Hopefully it won't. So yeah, I've got my tea in my Stay Safe Out There mug, which you can get at kendallrae.shop, and a percentage does go to the Higher Hope Foundation. If you're interested in supporting us and supporting that, it would mean a lot. So I'll have that linked below. But let's get into it. And as always, as this is an active case, everyone that I am going to be speaking about today is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I've got to make that clear, although I am sure when you hear the details of this one, you are going to have some strong opinions. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. And I want to start out how I always do by telling you about our victim and who she was while she was alive. So Suzanne Clark was born on June 16th, 1973, in Bexar County, Texas, to her parents Philip and Barbara, and she also had one older sister, Teresa. Her mom has said that Suzanne was both easy to raise and a joy as a child, and her loved ones often boast about her kind-hearted nature. People say that she was the type of person who would smile at every stranger and introduced herself to everyone she met. She was very social like that. And they also say that she always put the needs of others above her own. And that's just a fraction of the wonderful things that people have had to say about her. She very clearly impacted a lot of people, and people are just absolutely devastated by what has happened. Growing up, Suzanne attended the Texas Military Institute, where she graduated from in 1991. And after that, she received her bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Texas in Austin. And it was there, while she was in college, that she ended up meeting the man that she would eventually marry. And that brings us to Brad Simpson, a fellow UT student. And in May of 2002, after the two of them dated for several years, they did end up getting married. Now, Suzanne and Brad both had careers in real estate, and eventually they purchased a beautiful home in Alamos Park, Texas, which is just north of San Antonio. And they lived there with their 4 children. They had 3 daughters and 1 son. And at the time of her disappearance, her children were ages 20, 18, 15, and 5. Now, in 2024, Suzanne was an employee of Nick's Realty, a luxury real estate company co-owned by Brad's sister-in-law, and she was a very passionate agent. She had this natural ability to buy and sell homes, and it was really just a part of her life that brought her a lot of joy. However, what truly brought Suzanne the most joy was being a mother, and she was a damn good mother. One of her daughters has said that if her mom had any faults, it was that she always put others above herself. And that selflessness is what I imagine made her so special. Everything that she had done in life was for her family. And to have allegedly lost her life at the hands of a family member, her husband, who she once loved, it's hard to even wrap your mind around. And it's not just what he allegedly did to her in October of 2024. This had been going on for years. Through stories told by other family members, it's believed that Suzanne was a victim of domestic violence, and I'll be sharing examples of that throughout this episode, but in order to do so, I really need to go over the events that led up to her disappearance and kind of how it all unraveled. And that brings us to October 6th, 2024, which was not that long ago. And so this is the information we have at this point about how all of this went down. That day, Suzanne and Brad were invited to attend a party at the Argyle, which is this exclusive member and guest only dinner club. Originally, Suzanne had called her mom to ask if she could watch their youngest daughter, the 5-year-old, but ended up changing her mind and they brought her with them instead. There's actually this blurry surveillance photo that shows her there that evening. And so the three of them were at the Argyle from 6 to about 8:30 p.m. And during that time, witnesses say that Suzanne and Brad had some type of verbal altercation. Now, we don't know exactly what was said, but whatever it was, loud enough and upsetting enough that other people took notice. And then following this altercation, Suzanne and her daughter ended up leaving and going to the H-E-B supermarket where they stayed from 8:40 to 8:51 p.m. And after this very quick trip to the grocery store, it's believed that Suzanne and her daughter went back home. But shortly after returning home, Suzanne ended up leaving again. At 9:15 p.m., she calls a friend of hers and let her know that she was on her way over. And while driving there, she placed another call to her mom. And this phone call to her mom was extremely upsetting. In the call, Suzanne explained to her mom, confided in her mom, that Brad had assaulted her and caused pain to her neck, her back, and her arm. And then I'm not sure if she ended up telling her friend about this. I'm sure that information will come out in court. I think there's a good possibility she told her friend this as well. What we do know, though, is that Suzanne got to her friend's house at 9:25 p.m., but an hour later, she was already back home, which was confirmed by the Find My Friends app. And it was shortly after this that something terrible must have happened, allegedly. Now, what I'm about to share with you actually comes from a neighbor who has been a key witness in this case, because not only did he see some incredibly alarming things, but he was also the last person, as far as we know, to see Suzanne alive besides Brad, of course. So what were these very alarming things that he saw? Well, according to this neighbor, sometime between 10 and 11 p.m., he hears this loud altercation from outside his window. And when he goes and looks outside the window, he sees Brad and Suzanne in the street right in front of his house having a physical altercation. And the court documents read, quote, "The neighbor stated he observed that Miss Simpson was attempting to get away from Mr. Simpson's grasp as he tried to pull her downwards. The neighbor told me that he observed that after an approximately 1-minute struggle, both Mr. Simpson and Miss Simpson were last seen headed westbound from his residence. The neighbor advised that it appeared Mr. Simpson was clearly attempting to keep Miss Simpson from running away. But Suzanne did manage to get away, and then after this, she ran off into this wooded area near their home, and Brad followed her out into the woods, and that's where this neighbor lost sight of them. But then he decides to go ahead and get a flashlight and see if he could figure out what's going on, see if he could see anything. And that's when he hears, and this just gives me chills, 2 to 3 loud screams coming from the woods, and then just silence. Then an hour or so later, he hears Brad start up his GMC Sierra truck and leave the area. And about an hour after that, he heard Brad return. Now, I already know I'm going to get comments asking about this, and I totally understand why you would want to know, and I want to know as well. Did the neighbor call the police? The answer is no. And I don't know why. I have a million thoughts on this. It's very frustrating. Maybe there's more information as to why that we will understand more later. It's one of those situations where calling could have made a massive difference in this case, so it's frustrating. But again, I don't know all the details. I always try to encourage people that if you see something, you hear something, you say something. You try to get help because you never know. It could save someone's life or help solve a case in a big way. So yeah, it's just frustrating. And ultimately, this is all we know about the ordeal as far as what the neighbor saw or what has been released at this time. And let's just recap what we do know about her last moments, okay? So she is seen having this physical altercation with Brad. She breaks away from him. She runs off into the woods. He is seen following after her. Then there's a couple loud screams and then silence. So it tells you a whole lot just from that. So then the following day, October 7th, Suzanne was reported missing, but her husband wasn't even the first person to do it. Despite the fact that his 5-year-old school had called at 3 p.m. to say that Suzanne had failed to pick her up, Brad didn't bother to report her missing until after 10 p.m. that night. And it was actually a friend of Suzanne's who made the report first. A couple of friends actually had grown concerned that day when nobody had heard from her, and they even tried to talk to Brad about it. One friend called him up and basically said, "Hey, we're all worried and I'm going to go file a missing persons report." And she did at 9:57 p.m. And only after that did Brad go ahead and make a call himself to report her missing. So he reports her missing at 10:11 p.m. And in this report, he specifically said that he had not heard from his wife since the night before at 11 p.m. And from this point forward, 51-year-old mother of four, Suzanne Simpson, has been missing. And to this day, like I said in the beginning of this episode, her remains have yet to be found. Now, I wish I could say that law enforcement took this seriously from the moment they found out, but that is certainly not how everyone feels. Chandler, her oldest daughter, the oldest of their kids, was living in New York at the time. And when she found out that her mom hadn't been responding to anyone, she flew home immediately. And when she got there, she felt like police weren't doing anything about it. According to Chandler, it took her and her siblings actually going to the police station and making a statement for them to really get the ball rolling. Which is crazy that they didn't take this seriously from the second they found out, because Brad was not acting like a concerned husband of his missing wife. I mean, there were just red flags all over this case from the beginning. A day after reporting her missing, on October 8th, he failed to show up for an interview at the police station, and instead, he went to his ranch property, which was located about an hour away in Bandera County. But even if he wouldn't talk to investigators, several other people did, and one of those people was actually Brad's own brother, Barton. And I've got to say right off the bat, big fan of Bart. He has been so outspoken in condemning his brother's actions and showing massive support for Suzanne and her family. And I just want to get ahead of the comments here because I know people are going to have to say something. Yes, I know his name is Bart Simpson, and he was named before the show even came out, and I'm sure he's aware of it. So there's really no need to make comments about it. It's just so unnecessary and quite frankly rude. So let's refrain. Let's just not. We're moving past that, okay? So anyway, when he spoke to the police on the 8th, he shared that Brad called him and apologized for, quote, all the problems he's caused. And I guess he had been kind of separating himself from the family and not acting how he usually did, which is not super damning information or super relevant to the case, I guess, but it's noteworthy nonetheless. The really damning information, though, came from that neighbor who had witnessed all of this happening. And he did an interview with police on the night of the 8th. He told police everything that he had seen, everything that he had heard, everything that I just went over with you guys a couple minutes ago. Then there was also an interview with a school counselor that definitely shed some light on Brad and Suzanne's relationship. During that interview, investigators learned that just one day prior, their child told the counselor that on the day her mom went missing, her dad, quote, pushed her mother against the wall, hit physically her mother on the face, and hurt her mother's elbow inside their residence. And then she also stated that her dad turned off her mom's phone because they were fighting. And that last part, the part about the phone, would end up contradicting one of Brad's own statements. He claimed that Suzanne had lost her phone earlier that day, not that he had turned it off. And that wasn't the only contradictory statement that he had made. He later told police that the last time he saw his wife was on the morning of the 7th, around 6:30 a.m. when he was leaving to drop his daughter off at school. He said he peeked his head into the room that she was sleeping in and saw her in bed. Yet, when he reported her missing, he said that the last time he saw her was on the night of the 6th, but now he's saying it was on the morning of the 7th. So which is it? So it became pretty clear pretty quickly that this guy was full of shit, and thankfully after getting all this information, police did finally do something about it. In the early morning hours of October 9th, Brad Simpson was arrested for assault causing bodily injury, family violence, and unlawful restraint. And I'm really happy that at least his arrest came pretty quick. He was booked into the Kendall County Jail, and the following day he was transferred to the Bexar County Jail, where he was held on a $2 million bail. And apparently he showed no emotion when he was being arrested and didn't even ask why. And he continued to show no emotion as he was questioned about his wife's disappearance. Plus, and this is a big one, he had a number of lacerations and bruises on his hands and arms that law enforcement noticed right away. And along with his arrest, a search warrant for their home was obtained. And during that search on the 9th, the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Olmos Park Police Department found what appeared to be an indentation in the wall at the bottom of the stairway. An indentation that Chandler said was not previously there. And keep in mind, you guys, this was not some like little ding on the wall. This was a big indentation, like someone had been thrown against it, pushed against it, slammed up against it, something like that. And this was information that we know now, but at the time, the public did not know any of this. This investigation was kept incredibly close to the vest, and all people really knew was that Suzanne was missing and Brad was in jail on unrelated charges. Well, the charges had to do with her, but not about her disappearance. You know what I mean. And another thing that's interesting to note is the community was also very quiet in the beginning of this investigation. People didn't seem to be willing to talk about Brad and Suzanne's relationship on the record with the media. And I found that to be pretty interesting. And of course, I can understand that a lot of people probably just wanted to play it safe and not speculate on things too much until more was known about the case. But Chandler, her daughter, actually went on this one podcast. It's called the Connect with Jonathan Mark podcast, and he's a celebrity psychic medium. And she mentioned that part of the reason she moved so far away from home before all of this even happened was due to their community. And in the aftermath of her mom's death, I can only imagine how hard this has been on her and her siblings to be surrounded by people that they feel haven't done everything in their power to vocalize their support for their mom. There was a candlelight vigil that was held for Suzanne on October 13th, and it was actually there where Suzanne's mom spoke out for the first time publicly. Barbara shared that she'd spoken to her daughter only an hour before she went missing, and get this, she'd even come up with a plan to get her away from her abusive husband, a plan that she says she never got to share with her.
And when she went to the party, they came back from the party. Now, my speculation is maybe the whole thing is alcohol related, because when she got back, she called me up and told me the things that Brad had done to her physically. Well, I came up with an alternative plan for her. I hope that she'd move in with me and have her little toddler go to the elementary school in my neighborhood. I never got to tell her the plan.
And it was also made clear during this vigil that their family no longer believed she was alive. Even without proof of her passing, they just all knew in their hearts that she was gone. And for Barbara, although she first thought Suzanne might have been staying with a friend, she said she knew by then that her daughter would have reached out if she could. And her sister Teresa was actually in Hong Kong when she got the news, and here's a clip of her talking about it.
The first time I heard about it, I was on a trip coming back from Thailand, and I was in Hong Kong, and because of the time difference, it was on a Tuesday, and this took place on a Sunday. And I knew as soon as I heard that my sister had been missing for 16 hours that she was no longer with us. And so then I actually thought it was this very cut and dry situation just because I was, on the other side of the world. And so from my understanding, they had this fight at the Argyle Club. They came home. The neighbors witnessed it. And I just assumed that, they had figured the whole thing out that night. And so I didn't fully understand the severity of the situation. But once I understood that, the children hadn't spoken to her in 16 hours, that's when I just knew, okay, she's already in heaven. That's just all there is to it.
So like you heard her say, there were just signs that her sister wasn't alive. And one of the biggest ones being that she hadn't reached out to her kids. I mean, she was a very involved mother who loved her children more than anything and just would never not reach out to them and let them know that she was okay if she was alive. And then obviously another big one was that she didn't pick up her daughter from school. She just never would have done that. And then they also say that she missed a hair appointment, and they explain that she never would have missed that. So since then, search efforts have kicked off to try and locate her. But like I've said, at this point, law enforcement knew that they were looking for a body. And in addition to searching their home, they also searched an area along Interstate 10 in Boerne, Texas, along with a shopping center in that area. Now, Suzanne's phone last pinged a day after she went missing at 7:15 a.m., but it doesn't appear as searches related to that have yielded any results. And then obviously that wooded area surrounding the Simpsons' home was very thoroughly searched, and all that's been reported is that 2 items of interest were found. And at this point, we have no idea what those items were. Their biggest search, though, and the one that has definitely received the most media attention, was the search of the landfill. It was announced on October 15th that an extensive search effort was being conducted at a landfill in San Antonio. Texas Rangers, the Department of Public Safety, and the Almost Park Police Department scoured through heaps and heaps of trash in hopes of finding evidence connected to Suzanne's disappearance. And honestly, you guys, they thought they were going to find Suzanne herself. They quite literally said that they were confident they would recover her there. So for 4 days, they sifted through truckloads of trash, but they did come up empty-handed in terms of a body. And if they did find anything else, well, at this point, we just don't know. I do know that they were very hopeful to find her phone, which would be a major piece to this case that they definitely want to find. But to my knowledge, that remains missing as well. Now, at the time, investigators weren't saying anything as to why they were searching this landfill specifically. All they said was that they were there based on evidence, statements, and solid police investigation. Meaning, just trust us, we're here for a reason. And really, trust is all anyone has been able to do. You know, trust that the investigation is thorough. Trust that they're doing their best to figure out what happened to Suzanne, to find her, and trust that whoever did this will be brought to justice, which I hope is the case pretty soon. So over those next few days, the searches of the landfill continued, and investigators also expanded their efforts to include some other Simpson family properties, including the property in Bandera. No information was released to the public about what was found at the time, but things were definitely found. And what's interesting is despite the intensity of the search efforts, at no point did they ask for the public's help or involvement in the searches at all. In fact, they asked them not to help. So when I said they were keeping this close to the vest, they were keeping it very close to the vest. And they had the support of the Simpson family. Here's a statement that Bart released. It says, "We are so appreciative of the endless, grueling hours they've committed to uncovering solid information. We are comforted by the fact that they might be close to determining what happened to Suzanne. We are grateful to Chief Villegas, the Almost Park Police Department, Ranger Jesse Perez, and the Texas Rangers, and all assisting law enforcement agencies for their nonstop professionalism." And this would be one of just many statements that Bart has given. And I've just, again, got to say how awesome, how refreshing it has been to see a family member of an accused person acting this way publicly, to be in full support of the victim's family and the victim herself. I mean, I understand that it's only natural when a family member is accused of something as terrible as this to want to protect them and to stay silent. Or there are plenty of people that vocalize their support for their family member, even when the evidence is very stacked against them. But Bart hasn't done that at all. And I just think it's so awesome and, again, refreshing to see. And it was really from the beginning. I mean, from day one, he was on the right side of this whole thing. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Bart. And someone in his family actually shared information, vital information, with law enforcement that led to additional charges against Brad. While the landfill search was taking place, it was announced that Brad was being charged with the unlawful possession of a short-barreled rifle. Basically, a family member told police that Brad owned multiple firearms that they wanted to surrender. And among those firearms was a modified short-barreled rifle. Now, of course, this is America. Owning a weapon isn't illegal, but owning it without registering it absolutely is. And because it wasn't, these additional charges were added and a federal hold was placed on Brad, which basically means that if he were to post his $2 million bail, he would immediately go into the custody of the U.S. Marshals. And because of that, a bond reduction hearing he was scheduled to attend in mid-October was canceled. Basically, there was no point to argue to reduce his bail because if he posted it, he would immediately just go back into custody anyway. And if he is convicted on that charge alone, he faces up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And keep in mind, this is separate from the murder case. It seems that investigators are stacking things against him in order to at least get some conviction, because without a body, this murder is going to be a lot harder to prove. So this at least means that Brad will remain behind bars for something. And I'm sure you could have guessed this, but Brad's lack of cooperation has held strong throughout all of this. So much so that on October 16th, his brother, Bart, released another statement, and it reads, "Until Brad chooses to cooperate, we will continue to cooperate for him, as we have from the very beginning of this heartbreaking ordeal. The devastation this has caused to our family is overwhelming. Brad's refusal to cooperate is unacceptable. My sister and brother-in-law have stepped up to take care of the children, but the impact on our parents has been shattering. Our lives have been irreparably changed. We will not rest until we find Suzanne." And that promise to not rest until Suzanne is found is shared by law enforcement. They were, and they are, to this day, determined to do everything in their power to locate her remains and bring her home. Now, a clear alert had been issued shortly after her disappearance, which is like an Amber Alert, but for adults. And as the landfill searches came to an end, people were waiting for what was next. And what was next was enlisting the help of the Texas Search and Rescue Organization and focusing their efforts once again to the wooded areas in and around Olmos Park. Meanwhile, Suzanne's sister spoke publicly about all of this and shared what she was able to about how things were going and the need for answers for the sake of Suzanne's children.
One of the reasons that this is so crucial is because when a mother goes missing, they don't go missing by accident, because mothers have very set schedules of like coming home at night and making dinner, waking up and making breakfast, doing the hustle to make some money, taking the kids to their activities. So, when a mother goes missing of children need their mothers the most. And that is the reason that we've been able to get so many people involved in this situation, is because Suzanne was a beloved mother. She was an incredible person, and she just had the sweetest disposition. She always aimed to please. My mom's like, she's so easy to raise. And so when you have an incredible mother that is no longer there to cook 3 meals a day and get the kids to the activities and be involved in their schoolwork, their homework, everything that has to do with them, getting their hair done or getting them dressed or whatever the situation may be, it's just very heartbreaking not for somebody not to have their mother, is basically the bottom line.
So the pain that all of this has caused their children is just unimaginable. It is so horrific. My heart is absolutely broken for them. I mean, this is both parents that we're talking about here. Their mom is gone, likely at the hands of their father. And on top of that, they don't even know where she is. They don't have any answers. And coming to terms with all of that is going to be something that takes a long time. I'm not sure how much the 5-year-old knows at this point, but unraveling that and understanding that as she gets older is going to be just horrific. Truly, I'm just beyond heartbroken for them. There just are no words. It's horrible. I wish so badly that there is something that I could say that if any of them saw this, that would be comforting or change anything. But obviously that's just not possible. But there actually are a few things that we can all do to support their family during this time. In the description box or the show notes, if you are listening to the podcast version of the show, I'm going to put a link to a meal train page where money is being raised to support all 4 of the Simpson children. And this is amazing. They have incredibly been able to already raise $90,000 for the 4 children. But obviously, in the grand scheme of life, for them to have lost their parents and there's 4 of them, much more support is going to be needed. So I encourage any of you who are in a position to make a donation to do so. I will, again, have that linked below for you guys, or in the show notes. But also, I will be setting aside funds for them through my foundation, Higher Hope. And we are in the process of reaching out to them to get them a Hope grant if they are interested in receiving those funds. And then this little detail I need to share with you pisses me off beyond. Okay, there are people out there who have tried to profit off this situation by making fake GoFundMes. That's right, people have made fake GoFundMe accounts to try to exploit this tragedy. Chandler even had to post her Instagram account and tell people that it was a scam, and it's just awful they have to deal with something like that on top of everything else. God, our society is so sick. Who are these people, and how do you ever get to a point in life where you see a situation like this and a family suffering this way and think, oh, this is a good opportunity for me to try and make some cash out of it? Fucking sickos. But anyway, back to the case, and there are more charges to go over. And that makes me happy. On October 22nd, Brad was hit with an additional 2 charges. And buckle up because this is crazy. That day, he was charged with 2 felony counts of tampering with evidence and possession of a prohibited weapon. It turns out that he had asked his business partner to hide his unregistered AK-47 after Suzanne went missing. On October 8th, Brad texted James Cotter, who is his business partner, saying the following. At 4:35 p.m., he said, "If you're in Bandera, can you haul ass and meet me at your house?" Followed by, "I don't have much time and sorry for the urgency, but you're all I got, especially now. Social media is destroying me." Then a text from James reads, "I will be there in 40 minutes. Then another text from Brad saying, "Okay, make sure and leave all that shit into the pump house, especially the gun." And James responds later at 8:41 by saying, "Get over here. I won't tell anyone. And you're my brother." No, don't you worry. This James Cotter piece of shit was also arrested and charged too. He was arrested on the 22nd as well, and his bail was set at $1 million on charges of tampering with evidence and possession of a prohibited weapon. And even though it hasn't been stated whether or not the weapon is connected to Suzanne's disappearance, maybe they don't even know if that's the case, you can't tell me that this isn't extremely shady, especially when you hear this next bit. They found the weapon in the wall behind James's TV. And they're very confident that this weapon belongs to Brad because when they searched his house on the 9th, it was nowhere to be found. Plus, think about those text messages between him and James. Okay? They say it all. The two of them truly deserve the titles of Dumb and Dumber. All right, now in addition to these new charges, Dummy 1, Brad, also had his bail increased. Like Dummy 2, James, his bail was set at $1 million, bringing his total bail to a whopping $3 million. All in all, he was facing 4 charges, including unlawful restraint, family violence, tampering/fabricating with physical evidence, and possessing a prohibited weapon. And during all of this, Brad and his attorneys were fighting for him to be able to see his children. A judge had initially put in a no-contact order for all 4 of them, so they were filing motions to get this revised. They basically said that none of these charges had to do with his kids, so he should be able to speak with them. Now, a decision on this wasn't made until December, so I will get back to that closer to the end of this episode. And if things in this case weren't already insane and disturbing enough, get ready for this next part, because in early November, there was a major update in the case. On November 7th, it was announced that Brad Simpson was being charged with murder. And that day, he was temporarily taken out of the county jail for further questioning by the Texas Rangers.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, the Almost Park Police Department, along with the Texas Rangers, have charged Brad Chandler Simpson with murder in the death of his wife, Suzanne Clark Simpson. We realize that this doesn't bring closure to Suzanne's family, but we hope it will allow them to enter the next phase of their grieving process with more clarity. We'd like to thank Suzanne's family for their support and strength throughout this investigation. There are also many agencies that have helped us in this investigation, and we offer them our sincerest gratitude. This thorough and tireless investigation has been conducted in efforts to find justice for Suzanne and her family.
And I just had to include this. Here is Barton reacting to those charges.
It's always important to do what is right, especially when it is most difficult. This situation is heartbreaking for us, but it brings some peace to our family, knowing that the authorities have gathered enough evidence to move forward with charges. This helps us come to terms with the reality that Suzanne is no longer with us, allowing us to continue the difficult process of grieving and focus on rebuilding our lives for the sake of the children and our extended family. It is our sincere hope and prayer that Brad will find the compassion and courage to end his family's suffering by cooperating with the authorities to help us find his wife. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, how did these charges come about? And we were able to get that information because court documents were unsealed on November 12th that for the first time explained what evidence investigators had uncovered. Now, I'm going to go over all that evidence with you, but it is going to require us backtracking to really the very beginning. As a reminder, on the night that Suzanne went missing, she, her daughter, and Brad all attended this party at the Argyle. Then, after returning home, there was that physical altercation, which caused Suzanne to go to a friend's house and call her mom. And after coming home again, she and Brad had another physical altercation that was seen by that neighbor, and that ended with them running into the woods, followed by 2 to 3 loud screams, and then silence. Well, in the affidavit, we learned that on the night of October 6th, Brad allegedly accessed Suzanne's AT&T account and suspended her phone, making it impossible for her to make calls, receive texts, and other things like that. And obviously, this is another direct conflict with Brad's statement that Suzanne had lost her phone prior to coming home that evening. So with this information, it appears, and is, can I say, just incredibly obvious, that Brad was trying to prevent her phone from being used or traced. And on top of this, a witness that was interviewed by investigators stated that when Brad and Suzanne would get into arguments, it was common for him to take her phone away from her. And here's a text of his that highlights exactly that. "I still feel bad about tonight. I never should have grabbed her phone and drove off, but she was so protective of it. My dumbass didn't know her passcode, and I got locked out and had to bring it back. I really have no interest in looking through her phone or anybody else's. These devices are the devil." These devices are the devil? Strange statement. But you know what? I do agree with him in that. He is a dumbass. And then he also in his text said he feels bad, which I don't believe for a second. I don't think he ever felt bad. That's just my opinion, of course. But I think this is a perfect example of what Brad would do when he was feeling angry or jealous. And Brad was definitely a jealous person. The woman that he had sent that text to spoke to the police, and she claimed that Suzanne was aware that her husband was extremely jealous and that he would track her location. And then the affidavit goes on to explain what Brad had done with his own phone that night. And this shit is weird and also just extremely stupid. I mean, he really thought he was doing something here, thought he was smart, but in his own words, he's a dumbass. And yeah, now you're dealing with the FBI. So the FBI forensic examiners said that Brad shut down his phone in a manner that is rarely seen, that they referred to as lockdown mode, which they described as a shutdown of a cell phone done by a person who wants to avoid detection. They say he, quote, intentionally engaged in a series of on-off cycles to include complete shutdowns of his cellular device, preventing data collection. Now, this began at 11:09 on the night of the 6th and continued into the following day. And speaking of the following day, we ended up learning a ton about what he did on the 7th. Now, remember how I said Suzanne and her daughter went to the H-E-B supermarket on the night of the 6th? Well, at 12:30 a.m. on the 7th, Brad's truck was seen on surveillance video at the H-E-B. And that camera captured what appeared to be a large ice chest in the bed of his truck. Weird, right? And, you know, if you are familiar with true crime cases, you know exactly where this is going. And it gets even weirder because later that day at 7:53 a.m., we know that Brad dropped his daughter off at the Howard Early Childhood Center. And when he dropped her off, school surveillance cameras captured footage of something in the bed of his truck, which was at least 2 white trash bags with red strings, as well as that same large ice chest. Which, thinking of what could have been in those trash bags and in that ice chest, and the fact that his daughter was in that car as well, and then he brought her to school. Obviously, we don't know exactly what was in there at this point, but very disturbing to think about. And throughout that day, there would end up being several security cameras that caught glimpses into the back of Brad's truck. And man, does it look bad for Brad. So let's go through it all, okay? So at 9:12 a.m., Brad was captured at a Whataburger drive-thru located in Bernie. And in the back of his truck, cameras captured 3 white trash bags, a heavy-duty trash can, an ice chest, a large bulky item wrapped and secured in a blue tarp, and on top of that tarp was a firewood rack meant to conceal and weigh down the tarp. So yeah, very disturbing, and man, am I thankful that those security cameras, multiple security cameras, picked all of this up, because it's going to be absolutely vital. And the insanity doesn't even end there, because at 9:53 a.m., Brad's geolocation data shows him arriving at the Home Depot in Boerne, which, for reference, is about 30 minutes away from their house. And as you could probably guess, especially, again, if you are a regular true crime consumer, he ends up buying some very suspicious items in cash. Now, these items include 2 bags of Quikrete cement, an orange Home Depot construction bucket with a lid, a box of 32-count heavy-duty trash bags, 1 30-ounce bottle of Clorox disinfectant spray, and insect repellent. But wait, there's more, because idiot over here goes up to someone in the parking lot of the Home Depot and asked them if they knew where the closest dump in Boerne was. And he was then directed to the Kendall County Solid Waste Site, which is about 10 minutes up the road. Now, I do want to clarify that, to my understanding, this is not the same place that was searched back in October. That search was conducted in southeast Bexar County at the Republican Services Testman Road landfill. It was kind of confusing to piece this together, but my best guess is that trash from the Kendall County Solid Waste Site is sent to this other landfill. I mean, that's the only thing that would make sense to me, because investigators are fairly confident that Brad did, in fact, go to the Kendall County Solid Waste Site. Now, even though he did put his phone on lockdown mode after leaving Home Depot, trying to make it so they couldn't trace it, his truck's GPS system did place him right by that dump. Not to mention, a business that is close to the waste site actually did pick up on their surveillance cameras Brad driving away from that area. It is unknown at this point in time how long exactly he was there, but we do know a few of his next movements. After leaving the general area of this waste site, Brad was traced to a nearby Valero gas station at 11:15 a.m., where he used his debit card to buy gas, but then used cash to go inside and buy 2 one-gallon jugs of water. And it's noted that Brad appeared to have changed his shoes. Before, he was wearing flip-flops, and now he was wearing cowboy-styled boots. Most notably, though, was what was captured in his truck bed, or I should say, what wasn't captured in his truck bed. At the gas station, surveillance video showed that the 3 white trash bags were now missing. Everything else, though, was still there. And then following this, Brad's vehicle could be seen traveling westbound from Boerne into Bandera County, which, if you remember, Brad and Suzanne owned a home there. Then at 1:41 p.m., his truck was captured by a license plate reader traveling back into Boerne from Bandera. And this time, the blue tarp is no longer visible, and the firewood rack has been repositioned in the bed of his truck. But by the time he goes to pick up his daughter at school at 3:27 p.m., surveillance video shows that the firewood rack was gone. However, that ice chest and the large gray heavy-duty trash can were both visible. And it's a lot to follow, I know, but just stick with me. Next, at 4:07 p.m., Brad's truck was traced to the Bubble Bath Car Wash on San Pedro Avenue, located 10 minutes away from the school. And while he was there, he could be seen cleaning the driver's seat as well as the back seat of the car. Now, just FYI, his truck was seized back on October 9th, and a full forensic examination was done, which included photographs being taken of the truck. And according to the affidavit, when those photos were reviewed, they saw dried cement splashes located in both the rear passenger compartment and the bed of the truck. There was also a photo showing a 30-ounce Clorox bottle in the backseat as well. And at this point in time, only the ice chest was left back there. And despite his efforts to clean his truck, traces of his own blood were found in it when it was searched on October 10th. And if all that weren't enough, there was even more information in the affidavit. It turns out that during a search of Brad's Bandera property, they ended up finding a burn pit. And inside the burn pit, they found a laptop and 3 cell phones, all which are believed to belong to Brad. We also learned that a deputy went to that property on the 8th to speak with Brad, and he just so happened to be standing next to a lit fire. At this point in time, it is unclear what, if any, information was found on those devices. I'm assuming if he burned them, there was probably something on there, and hopefully they are able to retrieve it. But when Brad was originally arrested, he had a different phone on him, and that phone was definitely searched. And when they did, get this, they found 2 notes in his note app, and here's what they said. One was titled This Next Life, and then the other was titled Last Will and Testament, where he apologized for assaulting Suzanne back in August of 2023 and for assaulting her on October 6, 2024, the night that she went missing. And truthfully, I don't know if he admitted to murder in these notes. I don't know if it was any type of confession. This is all the information that we have, was that he was apologizing for assaulting her, not to mention the fact that these were written 2 days after she went missing. So talk about a guilty conscience. And the affidavit goes on to say another incredibly shocking thing, which I absolutely had to mention, which is that 2 months before she was murdered in August of 2024, Suzanne confided in her personal banker that if she went missing, to look for her in a lake. I guess Suzanne had shared some of the abuse that she had been experiencing, and for reasons we don't know, she told this woman that's where to look for her. And there are several lakes in the Olmos Park and Bandera area, which I'm guessing will probably be a focus of at least some search efforts going forward, or at least I hope so. And speaking of search efforts, the last thing from the affidavit that I want to share here today is that on October 23rd, an additional search was executed at their Olmos Park home. And during that search, they located 1 bag of Quikrete cement, a box of heavy-duty black trash bags, which contained 28 of the 32 bags, a gray heavy-duty trash can, and the metal firewood rack, which I imagine is all currently under forensic testing, or has been already. So obviously the amount of evidence and circumstantial evidence here is pretty shocking, and things do not look good for Brad. And what's crazy to me is that even after all of this has come out, he has continued to maintain his innocence. This monster even had the nerve to say that Suzanne was probably in Austin with her sorority sisters. Yep, just chilling in Austin with the girls. Okay, dude, just stop saying anything at this point. God, I really hope that they absolutely destroy his stupid ass in trial, which, by the way, could really be an uphill battle for prosecutors. Again, if you are an avid true crime consumer, you probably know just how difficult it is to get a guilty verdict without a body. Difficult, but not impossible, of course. But the burden of proof is so much higher without a body, because they not only have to prove that Brad was responsible, but they have to prove that she's not alive to begin with. And then we also have to keep in mind that there's no obvious murder scene. I mean, there's hunches, there's little things for sure. There's plenty of potential places that this could have happened, but there's not one specific place where there's a big arrow pointing to murder happened here. They're obviously going to continue to search for Suzanne's remains, and let's hope maybe by some miracle they are able to find them before trial begins. But in the meantime, they've got to be ready to convince a jury that she's dead without any direct evidence that that is the case. But again, I want to be so clear here that I am by no means saying that it's impossible to get a conviction without a body. We see it happen all the time. It's definitely doable. It does make it a lot harder. But in this case, the circumstantial evidence is incredibly damning. So I feel like they've got a pretty good shot. I mean, at least I hope, because, if this man gets away with this, allegedly murdering his wife, it's going to be devastating, just devastating. And you have to keep in mind, you have to think back to cases like Casey Anthony. They weren't able to prove that she was responsible for the death of her daughter. And so she was found not guilty of murder, which, that case still just makes me angry to this day. And there's so many cases like that. And truth be told, and of course it's their job, but Brad's defense attorneys didn't think that they had enough evidence to charge him with murder in the first place. So much so that in November, they actually called for an examining trial. Now, an examining trial is a hearing to determine whether or not there's sufficient evidence to justify bringing the case to a grand jury for an indictment. They basically called for prosecutors to turn all their cards over and show them what they had, so a judge could decide if this was even going to move forward. They asked to see any evidence, including written and recorded statements from Brad Simpson or any witness, physical evidence, pictures and videos, and a potential witness. And on top of that, his defense attorney has tried to get his bail reduced. He said that his client is being illegally confined because there wasn't enough evidence to lock him up, according to him, but luckily his efforts have not been successful, at least as of now. Interestingly, though, the domestic violence charges against him, the ones that he was originally arrested for, ended up being dropped, which I believe is so the DA's office can focus on the bigger picture at hand, so maybe that's for the best. And the bigger picture at hand here is murder. And God, for the sake of Suzanne, for this family, for their kids, I just hope more than anything that justice is actually served. And I wanted to share a very emotional social media post from Chandler, their oldest daughter. And it reads, "My mom was a victim of abuse from my father. My father took my mother's life in a state of rage and control. In our community, this should not be happening, and I will not stop speaking as the voice of my mother until she is found. I will forever represent all victims of domestic abuse and assault. As my mother's daughter, I will tell our story over and over again. With every breath, I will make sure you remember her name. Suzanne Simpson was a victim of abuse and a victim of this community. Beyond being a victim, she was a phenomenal mother, hardworking, driven, loving, and kind. Shame on my community for not speaking about domestic violence. Within Alamo Heights, women are marginalized by society and misogyny every day and told to keep their mouths shut. This is the time to speak. Speak for my mom. Speak for yourself. Your voice will be heard. My mom fought for her life, fought for her family, and herself. Our community needs to come forward with strength and bring awareness and change to uplift women who brought us life. Those who choose to remain silent are choosing to blind themselves from domestic violence in our homes. My mother tried to leave my father and lost her life. If you stand with my mother and our family, please be present at my dad's hearing on November 13th in San Antonio. Stand with us all in silence for my mother. Justice will be served and my mom will be brought home. Shame on Alamo Heights for not educating youth and community on domestic violence and sexual assault as women across this world suffer in silence as victims. Any woman of the AHHS community that has experienced any kind of verbal, physical, or sexual abuse, this is your time to speak. Be strong like my mother and speak up." I've read through that a handful of times, and every time I do, I am just left almost speechless. It is so powerful, so brave, so true in so many ways. She had so much courage to say this and say it in such a bold way. And to be honest, her posts were the last push that I needed to cover this case. I wanted to tell Suzanne's story. I wanted her words to be amplified. And I'm glad that this episode is going out when it is, right before this trial, so that we can show this family as much support as possible. She is right. There is danger in not speaking out about domestic violence, and there is especially danger in not educating people on what it looks like because it's not always physical. And based on what she's written, it sounds like Suzanne was a victim who died while trying to get away, which, as we know, is the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. Now, I also wanted to read another social media post that was written by her daughter, Chelsea, and it reads, "It has been a month without the most joyful, devoted, beautiful, kind-hearted, courageous, and nurturing mother in our lives. Without the presence of her radiant smile and positive spirit, there is a void here on earth and in my heart which will never be filled or forgotten. The world was a better place with my mom. She lit up every room she walked in with her unfiltered, hilariously energetic, and welcoming personality. Those who knew her understood how easy and lighthearted it felt to be around her. Not only was she a joy to be around, she was also the most hardworking, resilient, and patient woman to walk this earth." And her words there just really bring Suzanne to life. And with everything that's happened, it's really important that we take the time to learn about who she was. And man, did she sound like such an incredible person that anyone would have been lucky to know. And I know all 4 of her children were so lucky to have her as a mother while they had her. But getting back into the case here, I wanted to briefly circle back to dummy number 2, James, Brad's business partner. I mentioned earlier that his bail was set at $1 million, but after just over 2 weeks behind bars, his attorney got it reduced to $100,000, which he posted the very next day. As a condition of his release, though, he had to surrender his passport and be under house arrest with a GPS monitoring device. Plus, he's not allowed to have any contact with Brad. Then on December 16th, he was indicted on charges of tampering with evidence with the intent to impair an investigation and possession of prohibited weapons. And as of now, this is the most recent update we have on his case. Brad, on the other hand, we have a few more big updates. On December 3rd, 2024, he was officially indicted by a grand jury on several charges, including murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon causing bodily injury, tampering with a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and possession of a prohibited weapon. His bail was also increased again to $5 million. Then, just 2 days later, and I'll warn you ahead of time, this is really disturbing. I hate even saying this, But it was revealed in an indictment that Suzanne's DNA was found on a motorized saw that belonged to Brad. They call it a reciprocating saw, which is a handheld power tool that can cut through some very tough material. And I don't think I need to paint that picture for you guys. And at this point, we don't know how the saw was used, or we don't really know much information about this. I'll explain what we do know. But it's just, God, when I learned that detail, I felt sick to my stomach. I don't understand how someone could get to that point where they would want to use a saw on someone that I'm assuming they loved at some point in their life, someone that birthed their 4 children. There's just no words. I can't even speak any further on it. But now, when it comes to this saw, all we learned is that Suzanne's DNA was found on it and Brad tried to hide it. We don't know where they found it. We don't know how they found it. We also don't know what kind of DNA was found. Was it a fingerprint? Was it blood? Was it hair? We have no idea. But following this, on December 9th, Brad had a hearing, and it was mostly just procedural stuff. Really nothing that's important to go into detail on. But after that hearing, his brother did make another statement saying that he hoped Brad would do the right thing and come forward. He also did give a small update on the kids. The 2 youngest have been in his care, so let's take a listen to that.
My hope is that, like I've said from the beginning, that Brad will do the right thing and come forward and tell us everything he knows so that we can end this awful ordeal for the children and all the rest of us.
How are the family? How are you guys doing right now?
Well, we're doing as well as can be expected. I mean, Brad's children are surrounded with love and caring and compassion, and they're doing as well as I think you could for somebody in this situation.
And what he's saying is all we can really hope for. That and justice, which hopefully will be coming soon. Now, on December 10th, a gag order was put in place because of how much attention this case has gotten publicly. The judge understandably wants to ensure that Brad receives a fair trial. But unfortunately, there have been some violations of that order. In the December 19th hearing, Barton and Teresa were both cautioned about violating it. Barton wasn't actually there at the hearing, but Teresa was, and she had to go up on stand in front of the judge where she was incredibly apologetic, which had to be very nerve-wracking for her considering she's just a few feet away from the man who stands accused of killing her little sister. Now, for Barton, it was said that he violated the order by going on the San Antonio Express News podcast where he discussed domestic violence.
But we know that you can't say anything directly about the case because of the gag order, but you have been very open and outspoken about a message to your brother, Brad. Do you mind saying what that message is?
Do the right thing. I just think that, and without speaking specifically to my brother Brad, just saying when somebody is in this situation, it would be so much better if you put yourself at the mercy of the court. There is a redemption in the truth. The truth will set you free. My hope is in that awful situation where, God forbid, somebody hurts someone, call an ambulance. Call 911. Get them the help you need.
Now, that's only 40 seconds of a nearly hour-long episode, but in my opinion, I'm very proud that he, went and took time to talk about something as important as domestic violence and is making so much effort to really stand up for Suzanne and for her kids and for women all over their community. But a lot of people feel that it violated the gag order just by mentioning the case at all. However, nearly the entire episode was focused on domestic violence. I thought it was very well done, very thoughtful, and again, brave and awesome of him to do this. So I wanted to link it below if you would like to take a listen to it for yourself. Now, as for Teresa, Brad's attorney argued that she'd still been in contact with the media even after the gag order was put in place. Luckily, neither of them were punished. It was more of a, hey, be careful. I don't know if you realized you violated the gag order type of thing, but I really feel bad for both of them, especially Teresa. She definitely was a bit shaken up by the whole thing, understandably. But these violations weren't even the point of the bond hearing. The point was to go over Brad's bond conditions. Remember earlier when I said that Brad was fighting to see his kids? Well, that is what the hearing was about. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, it was determined that he would be allowed contact with some of his children. The judge ruled that Brad is allowed to write letters to his 15-year-old son but he's not allowed to have any contact with his 5-year-old daughter. His 2 older children weren't ready at the time to speak with him, but if they choose to, it would be allowed. Obviously, though, with the stipulation that all communication is thoroughly monitored. And at the end of the day, I do believe that his children should be able to make that call on their own, whether they want to speak to him or not. That should be entirely up to them. Their family held a private celebration of life on December 17th. However, details of that event have been kept out of the media, which I think is for the best. I imagine, though, that there was great sadness in the unknown. Not knowing where she is or what exactly happened to her or what the outcome of this trial is going to be has got to be weighing so heavy on everyone. But hopefully some of these questions are answered soon and justice is right around the corner. So assuming that nothing gets pushed back, Brad's trial is scheduled to begin on February 12th, 2025, which is very, very soon. He is facing up to 99 years in prison, which doesn't feel like enough if you ask me. This is just my opinion. He allegedly committed this murder, but I truly think that Brad is an evil, evil person. In my opinion. God, I just hope more than anything that there's some sort of resolution when all is said and done and that this family can get some peace and justice. And I'm sure there will be people that comment this, but this case reminded me a lot of the Brian and Anna Walshy case, which I covered in February of 2023, and Brian hasn't even gone to trial yet. That trial is scheduled for October of this year, and I likely will be covering that trial. There's so many disturbing similarities between these cases, and, in both of these cases, they're going into trial without a body, and it makes me very, very nervous. And it's just so horrendous for these families not knowing where the victim is. And what's really sad, too, is that Barbara, Suzanne's mom, has actually shared that she had always held Brad in high regard and thought of him as a good father. And it just goes to show you that people never really know what's happening behind closed doors, and it's really scary to think about. It's so heartbreaking that Suzanne was in this horrible relationship with this horrible person, and she lost her life before she could get away. And now her kids have to live with the reality of what happened to her for the rest of their lives, especially the fact that it happened at the hands of their father, allegedly. Like I said before, our team at Higher Hope is reaching out to them to try and get them a Hope grant if they are interested in that, and I really hope that we can help them in some way. And, again, thank you to all of you who have supported Higher Hope and all of the work that we've done so far. And even just by supporting this show or any of the Mile Higher Media shows, you are helping us to help others, and it means a lot. Oh, and again, I just wanted to mention that if you're interested in showing your support for their family, you can do so by visiting the Meal Train page that is linked in the description and show notes of this episode. I really wish I had something more positive to end on, more of a conclusion, but I hope that that is coming soon. Let me know if you guys would be interested in some post-trial coverage. And, hopefully justice is right around the corner. We're going to have to see how this shakes out. But I feel like, again, the circumstantial evidence is really damning. So hopefully it will be enough. But that is all I have for you guys at this point in time on this case. I'm sorry that I probably seemed very tired and out of it, and my voice and nose probably sound horrible. So I'm going to go get in bed because this actually took me like 4 hours to record, 4.5. I had to take a lot of breaks because my throat is on fire. But thank you for sticking with me. I will be back next week to discuss another case. But until then, as always, stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Rae. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you're new to the show, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you all here today. And be sure to click subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. So you guys, today's case, oh my God. Okay, I started seeing this popping up on my feed over the last couple of months. And when I really looked into the details of this one, let me tell you, my jaw was on the floor. Today, we're going to be diving into what we know about an ongoing case. It has yet to go to trial. I will explain. But we're going to be talking about Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. And you may have heard this referred to in the media or social media as the au pair murders, or also the au pair love triangle murders. I've seen a couple different names for it, but it is truly I can't even put into words. It's just nuts. And it's incredibly sad. I mean, these victims and the way that they have been smeared or were attempted to be smeared to damage their image, their character has just been so awful. I swear, as long as I have been covering cases, to this day, it never ceases to just blow me away what some people are willing to do to try and get what they want and how they think they're actually going to get away with it. But oftentimes, these people who commit these crimes are stupid. And we sort of love that, right? Because stupid people get caught, and that's what happened here. The reason I wanted to cover it now is because trial was supposed to begin very soon. Unfortunately, it did get pushed back, which I will explain all of that, but I thought it was a good time to go over what we do know so far, which has been sort of limited. I'll explain here and there the things, that we're still missing at this point. And there's also quite a bit of, or I should say, a lack of information regarding the victims and who they really were. And I know you guys know that that's really important to me to tell you as much about who they were while they were alive as possible, because I think it's just as important as talking about what happened to them in the end of their lives when they were stolen from them. As I just said, we have two victims in today's case, and their names are Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan. And like I also said, a big part of the plot in their murders were to make them look like bad people who made bad choices, and that those choices led to their murders, which could not be further from the truth. But that is what the intention was. So I guess in some way, I wanted to try my best to set the record straight with the information that we do have. I do, before we go any further, I forgot to mention earlier that everyone in this case at this point is still innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So we have to keep that in mind. And you will hear me say things like alleged and allegedly throughout this case. However, I will say the evidence really does speak for itself, but of course there is the presumption of innocence, so I just had to mention that. But anyway, let's get back into talking about our victims, starting with Christine Ann Banfield. Now, she was born as Christine Ann Benson, and she was born in September of 1985 and grew up on Long Island. She attended Quinnipiac University from 2003 to 2007 and graduated with a degree in nursing. And then, along the way, she ended up meeting a guy named Brendan Banfield. And in 2010, the two of them got married. And I wasn't able to pinpoint how the two of them met, and truthfully, I really don't have a lot of insight into their early relationship, and there are definitely some things that I'll share with you later on that would point to there being problems with one of them, but I don't want to come on here and say that the relationship was this or that or try to paint a picture too much, because at the end of the day, I just don't know, especially when it comes to how their relationship was in the early days. What I can tell you, though, is they had one daughter who Christine loved very, very much. She was actually a pediatric ICU nurse, so caring for kids was quite literally her life's work. She was also a frontline worker during the height of the COVID pandemic, so truly a hero in my book. And I loved learning about this, but a patient of hers actually described her as an angel, saying that after waking up from a weeks-long coma, Christine was at his side, and she even helped shave him and set up a Zoom call so that he could speak to his family. And even with that little bit of info that we do have, I do think it paints a picture of someone who was incredibly selfless. Now, when it comes to our second victim in this case, Joseph Ryan, I'm going to hold off on talking about him for a little bit because it will make more sense to speak about him later on when he comes into the case. But I do need to get into telling you more about Brendan Banfield and what was going on in his and Christine's life at the time of her murder. So who is Brendan? Well, in addition to being Christine's husband, he was a federal agent working as a criminal investigative agent for the IRS. And I want to heavily emphasize that bit. This man was a federal agent. Now, this was a job he got in 2019, and that same year, he and Christine ended up moving from Long Island to Herndon, Virginia. They moved into this beautiful home on Stablebrook Way, and that was ultimately where they were planning to raise their daughter and build their lives together. However, because of how busy they both were with their careers, they decided that it would be beneficial to hire an au pair, which also just want to point out, I was definitely saying au pair in the start of this episode, so I'm sorry, my bad. It is au pair, okay? However, I'm sure by this point in the episode, Hundreds of people have pointed out my mistake, but that's okay. I do make mistakes. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with what an au pair is. I actually didn't really know what they were until I had my daughter and was looking into childcare solutions. And it's a pretty interesting concept and can be very beneficial in most cases. It works out great for a lot of families, but they're essentially a live-in nanny. And normally, au pairs seem to kind of become part of the family if it's a good match. And typically, it's someone who is part of a cultural exchange program. So they get the benefit of coming to a new country, traveling in that sense, and then also getting free housing and a stipend in exchange for childcare and sometimes some household work, most of the time, stuff like that. Oftentimes they'll travel with families, and everyone kind of builds their au pair experience a little differently. And I'm sure there's some more nuances. And like I said, every situation is different. I've not had an au pair myself, so I'm not too familiar with that world. But from what I've read, it seems like most people have great experiences with their au pairs. And both ways, that au pairs have great experiences with the families that they're with. Very often, I'm sure, like I said, sometimes it does not go well, like it did in this case. But anyway, that is what the Banfield family had signed up for. And they ended up getting paired with Juliana Perez Magalhaes, who is a 21-year-old Brazilian au pair who they eagerly welcomed into their home. And a friend of Juliana's says that she was especially excited to be paired with the Banfields because she had actually been pursuing nursing herself. So to be paired with Christine, a nurse, was a pretty cool match. You know, she thought they'd have a lot in common, that she could maybe learn something from her. So it seemed to be a great fit for everyone involved. Keyword seemed to be. Now, I've also seen it reported that the Banfields already had a Brazilian au pair before, and it was hard to really get information on that. So this may not have been their first time, and it's possible that they were familiar with how this all works. That being said, though, I don't think anyone, especially Christine, could have predicted how things would end up playing out, which takes me to February 24th, 2023. That morning at 7:49 a.m., a 911 call was placed by Juliana's cell phone to the local police department. However, no report was made. The dispatch officer heard what sounded like moaning, and then the call was disconnected. Now, as for what happens next, different sources have been reporting different things, which is just the nature of this case and a lot of cases that are still developing. But basically, some sources say that there were a few more of these hang-up calls, and then other sources say that it was just that one. And of course, I'm sure that that will all be clarified during trial or potentially before, we don't know. But the main point, which is generally agreed upon, is that 13 minutes after the first call, the main 911 call was made at 8:02 a.m. And this call was also made by Juliana's cell phone, and she was the first person that dispatch spoke to on that call. And it's been reported that she was pretty hysterical and hard to understand, but she ended up saying something along the lines of a friend was hurt. However, right after that, Brendan apparently took the phone and said something much more alarming. He told dispatch that he had shot a man because he found him in his house stabbing his wife. And when first responders got to the scene, appalling is the word that has been mostly used to describe what they saw. Inside the Banfield's house, 37-year-old Christine was found in an upstairs bedroom, naked with just her socks on, and numerous stab wounds to her upper body near an unnamed man. She was alive at this point, but she was in critical condition. And then later that evening, I'm sad to say that she was pronounced dead after life-saving measures were unable to save her. Now, as for this unnamed man, who was unnamed at the time, he was found deceased with 2 gunshot wounds, one to his chest and another to his head. And sadly, there was no opportunity to try and save him because he was pronounced dead at the scene. And this victim was identified as 39-year-old Springfield resident Joseph Ryan. Now, unfortunately, information about his life was even more difficult to find, but I did find something that I wanted to share that came from his mom. His mom, Deirdre Fisher, who says that she loved him so much, told a local news station, quote, "We spent countless hours as an adult on the phone. He would call me all the time. I can't really tell you the level of our friendship. Not everybody gets to have that, and I was blessed with that as a parent." And personally, I think that says a lot about a man when they have a great relationship with their mother. And then there was also a friend of Joseph's who spoke to the media that said something that I think also speaks a lot about who Joseph was. He described him as, quote, "the kind of person who took in dogs that had no chance of being adopted and just loved the hell out of them." And as a dog lover myself, as I'm sure many of you are as well, I just loved hearing that little detail about him. And personally, I think people who really love animals and especially take in rescues and foster animals are just very special humans. That aside, though, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering who he is in relation to this crime. How did he end up involved? How did he end up dead at the Banfield home? Because according to Brendan, this was the guy that he walked in on in his home, stabbing his wife to death. But is that really the truth? Well, law enforcement, they would tell you, no, it's not. Now, from the get-go, they had a very weird feeling about this whole scene. I mean, it was just one of those doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, doesn't sound right situations all around. Just right off the bat, there were several things about Brendan and Juliana's stories that were not adding up. And for starters, and this is a big one, there were no signs of forced entry. And if Joseph was an intruder, which was one of their initial theories, you would expect some sign of a break-in. Now, of course, investigators do have to consider that it's possible that they had just left the doors unlocked, so there wouldn't have been a sign of forced entry. But the house in general just seemed to be in totally fine condition. So that was one of their first sort of red flags, is that this did not look like a typical home invasion. And then second of all, Brendan seemed to have no concern about Christine's condition, but he kept asking about Joseph's. That's right. He didn't really seem to have much interest in how his wife was doing, but instead, literally, while paramedics are there in front of him performing life-saving measures on his wife, Brendan was asking if Joseph still had a pulse. Now, to, give the benefit of the doubt a little, I guess you could say, and this is before we get into everything else where the benefit of the doubt just kind of goes out the window, but I guess you could say that, he did admit to shooting this guy right away. So I could see why he would have an interest in if he was alive or not. Doesn't explain why he wasn't curious about his wife's condition. But also it makes me think, and I'm sure that this is the case, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking this as well, that he was very concerned about if Joseph was going to survive or not, because Joseph would be able to be a witness in the case and would have known what actually happened at the scene that day. But I think the biggest red flag here, the most bizarre thing that law enforcement noted, was the very strange story that they were being told that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. First off, when officers were initially entering the house, Juliana was asked who shot who, and she said Brendan.
Who is the shooter? Who shot who?
Brendan, he's an officer.
I got a blowout kit if you need it.
Now, maybe this wasn't the right moment for her to go into her whole spiel about what happened, but based on what she would end up saying later that morning, it was really interesting that in that moment, she only mentioned that Brendan was the shooter. Because the truth is, they both shot Joseph. But according to her own story, which she told later that evening at the police station, she explained that around 7:30 a.m., she and the Banfield's daughter left the house with the intention of going to the zoo. And sources say that Christine was the one to purchase their tickets that morning. So simple enough, right? Going to the zoo, nanny, au pair takes child to the zoo. Very, very common. When I was a nanny, I would take the kids I'd nanny to the zoo, I feel like at least once a week. And I take my daughter to the zoo all the time. So very normal situation. And then when leaving the house, she had forgotten the lunches that she had packed her and the Banfield's daughter in the fridge, which is also very common. I feel like every parent or caregiver forgets the lunch at home or something at home at least once. But when her recollection of the morning starts becoming strange is what she said next, which was that when she pulled back up to the house, she saw a car that she didn't recognize in the driveway. And some sources have reported this, and I'm not entirely sure, at this point in this case, but Some sources are reporting that she also witnessed a man that she didn't recognize entering the house and carrying a bag. And this was concerning to her, of course, so she decided to call Christine and supposedly be like, who is this guy? Because maybe it was a maintenance worker or something like that. She wanted to make sure it was someone who was supposed to be at the house, right? Again, somewhat normal. Now, she knew that Christine was still at home at the time, but apparently Christine didn't answer the phone. So she called Brendan, who she knew had already left for work. He had left the house around 7:11 a.m., and he had told detectives that he decided to make a quick stop at his local Mickey D's for an Egg McMuffin. And McDonald's is where his cell phone location data placed him, so we know that he did go there. And I will be getting back to that, but for now, just know that that's where he was. But anyway, Juliana calls him, he picks up, and she wants to ask him, obviously, about this supposed strange car/man situation. And unlike Christine, Brendan picks up. The call came in at 7:37 a.m. and he drove straight home where he met Juliana and his daughter outside of the house. And then after that, the three of them entered through the back door and into the basement. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you are having the exact same thought process as me right now and wanting to scream because this makes no sense, especially if you are a parent. Why on earth, if you thought an intruder was potentially in your home, would you bring your child inside to check it out with you? Okay? No one would do that. No one in their right mind would do that unless they're stupid, quite frankly. And maybe that's the case here. Or it's just that he knew there wasn't an actual intruder. Second thing, also, why would you bring in your au pair? There's no reason for them to go in with you. Why wouldn't you just leave the au pair with your child in the car where it's safe and go check out the scene yourself? Better yet, why wouldn't you just call the police and have them go check it out for you? And obviously there's some urgency if your wife is inside the home and you think there's a potential intruder. So like, I get that to some degree, but with his time having to drive from the McDonald's back home, he could have easily called law enforcement. So not making a whole lot of sense here in any way. But anyway, according to their story, the three of them are in the basement, but then Brendan leaves Juliana and his daughter to go upstairs and, quote, investigate. Pretty quickly, though, Juliana says she went upstairs to see what was going on. And that's when she heard Brendan screaming, "Police, drop the knife!" Apparently, he had gone up to his bedroom to find this man, Joseph, holding a knife to his wife's neck. And Joseph supposedly told Brendan that he was going to kill Christine. And that's when he began to repeatedly stab her right in front of him. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is the story according to Brendan and Juliana. Now, let's give them the benefit of the doubt here, since we don't have all the facts and they're innocent till proven guilty. And we can say that maybe this portion of their story was believable, potentially. Of course, someone could have broken into the house and held a knife to his wife's neck. Is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? Probably not. However, the next part of their story, I simply cannot give the benefit of the doubt to at all because it is so outlandish, so ridiculous that it makes any part of their story that could be true just totally lose credibility. I guess I have to say that's just my opinion though. But according to Juliana, when this man began stabbing Christine, Brendan pulled out his service weapon. Remember, he is a federal agent, and he proceeded to shoot him in the head. Here's the part that makes no sense though. Apparently, after shooting him once, Brendan told Juliana to run into the bathroom and grab a second gun from a locked safe, which he gave her the code to. And when she came back into the room, she says that she shot Joseph, this time in the chest. But the question here is, why did she have to shoot him at all? She would go on to say that she did it in self-defense of the family, but does that make any sense? If Brendan still had a gun in his hands, why didn't he shoot Joseph a second time if he was still posing a threat to Christine? I mean, keep in mind, he had shot him the first time in the head, and I feel that would be enough to stop him from stabbing Christine. So why would Juliana then have to go into the bathroom, unlock a safe, grab another gun, and then shoot him again in the chest? doesn't add up at all. Now, a report from the New York Times says that her lawyers later claimed she was just acting on orders from her employer, but acting on orders only shifts the blame. It doesn't explain why there needed to be a second gun at all. Also, I don't want to just breeze past the fact that the first shot was fired using Brendan's service weapon, okay? So because he's a member of law enforcement, he will have an administrative officer involved shooting investigation that will take place as well. And he's going to have to explain why his service weapon was used in that murder in the first place. Now, I learned that he won't have to be Mirandized for this, which wasn't really elaborated on, but I found that piece to be incredibly interesting. And I also found it interesting and quite strange that Brendan said that he shot Joseph on the 911 call. He never said we or even mentioned that Juliana was part of it at all. And I guess you could argue that in the heat of the moment, he just said what first came to mind. So maybe it's not something to read into, but in the scheme of things and how this is all shaking out, I think we can all agree that that is pretty strange. Now, I thought it would be helpful for you guys to hear some of Juliana's story right from her mouth. So we do have some body cam footage that I want to play for you now.
If you just want to tell me quickly what happened,
I don't know what happened. Everything happened so fast. I was going to take her to the zoo this morning.
Can you go with Officer Batani really quick?
Why don't you come with us?
No.
He has some stickers for you.
I was going to take her to the zoo this morning. And then I forgot the lunch we were going to bring. I turned around and came back here. And then, I saw this car. This is her car.
Are they both inside?
Person I guess.
You don't know who that? Do you know who the person is?
I have no idea. And then I started calling her to see what's going on because it's early in the morning. Like, who was here? And then it was straight to voicemail. I called Brendan. It's her husband. He's up there. I told him. I see he's trying to car, but I don't know who is that. Can you please come in here? I'm scared. I was just bothering the car. And then he came here, and then we went inside. The guy, I don't know who it is, he was spanking her. I was just here.
Were you here when it happened, or did you walk up in there and that's how they were?
Yeah, he went upstairs first, and then I went to see what is going on. I left in the basement, and then when I went upstairs, Brendan was saying, "Police, drop the knife." But then it was too fast. They were yelling at each other. He was saying like, "Drop
the knife or the gun?
The gun." And Brendan said, "No, police, don't drop the knife." And then he was saying, I'm gonna kill her. And I don't know, he started stabbing her. I think Brendan shot him, and he asked me help to shot him too because...
It's okay. You don't have to get it all out right now.
I never saw her before. Like,
you didn't see the girl before either? So the guy and the girl you don't know?
She's my boss.
Okay.
She's mom. But I never seen it before. Like, it's a lot of blood.
Okay.
I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about that footage, about her demeanor, about what she said. Let me know your thoughts. Now, upstairs at the scene, officers ended up finding a set of cleanly cut pajamas, a bag containing fetish accessories, which will make more sense in a little, 2 guns, as well as the knife. And downstairs, they found the Banfield's 4-year-old daughter. And all the reports out there say, thankfully, she was found unharmed. And of course, yes, physically unharmed. However, emotionally, mentally unharmed, obviously not the case. She lost her mom that day, and at this point, I don't think it'll be a surprise to you guys that her father was involved, so she lost him too. Not right away, but eventually. And of course, we don't know how the trial's going to play out, but chances are she will lose her father through all of this as well. She was brought into the station that morning alongside Juliana, where both of them made statements. And while the police aren't sharing much information about their daughter, they have said that she is safe and in good care now. But the fact that this is her reality as a 4-year-old, it's so heartbreaking. It makes me so angry that if Brendan really did this to her mother, that is the most heartless thing. I don't understand how as a parent you could do that. And I know I bring this up in cases all the time where one spouse kills the other spouse and there's a child involved or multiple children involved, how evil can you be to take the parent of your child or children away from them? And this is totally just my opinion, but I don't even think that's possible if you actually love your child. If you really do have love for your child, but are willing to hurt them in that way by taking away their parent, their other parent, I don't think you ever loved them to begin with. I really don't. My heart just absolutely breaks for her. And I hope that what we're hearing is true, that she's getting the best care and support possible during this time. I cannot even imagine at that age having to wrap your mind around all of this. And hopefully she's being shielded from it to some degree. But of course, as she gets older, she will understand more of it with time. So it's just so fucked up. There's no words. But even though nothing at the end of the day is going to bring her mom back, hopefully getting justice and the truth will be a positive step forward in her healing. And luckily, I really do think justice is on the horizon. I mean, we never know how these are going to go, but like I said earlier, I think the evidence here really speaks for itself. Now, from the jump, like I said, law enforcement was very wary of that story. But in all honesty, they didn't have any proof that Brendan and Juliana were lying, at least not at first. So from that point forward, they needed to kick off an investigation to either prove or disprove what they'd been told. And that meant figuring out who this man in the home was and why he was at the Banfield's house so early that morning. And I'll just cut right to the chase here. As part of their investigation, digital evidence was collected from the Banfield's home, and on Christine's computer, they found that someone, keyword someone, had created a profile on the website FetLife. I had never heard of this website, but I learned it's a social networking website for the BDSM kink and fetish community. And the profile's username was Anastasia9, and it featured a photo of Christine wearing a bathing suit. Now, this photo of her in a bathing suit just so happened to be a photo that she had sent Brendan. And then what gets very strange here is that Brendan had then sent the photo to Juliana, who then emailed it to herself. Okay? In what world, for what reason would you ever need to send a photo of your wife in a bathing suit to your au pair? You just don't. Anyway, though, when investigators started going through all of the data from her computer, they learned that this Anastasia 9 person had been communicating with a profile tied to Joseph Ryan. Then they found messages on an encrypted messaging app where the two of them had been discussing meeting up to, you know, live out these fantasies that they were talking about, specifically fantasies involving knife and blood play. Now, these are sexual acts that involve the consensual use of a knife for physical and mental stimulation, as well as the consensual drawing of blood. So based on these messages, it looked like Joseph and Christine had set up a date to have this kind of consensual sexual interaction. And that date was scheduled for February 24th, 2023. So you can see the setup here. This would have been the same morning that Juliana was supposed to take their daughter to the zoo and Brendan would be at work, and maybe Christine had planned this little secret rendezvous at home. But if you're thinking critically here and you know all the information that we have gone through just thus far in this episode, you know that this is a clear setup. Allegedly, I have to say. And to law enforcement, they did not think that Christine was behind this account at all. They believed that someone posed as her and then lured Joseph to her house under false pretenses in order to frame him for her murder. How insane is that? Not to mention that through their investigation, they found not one single shred of evidence that Christine was at all into BDSM, knife play, or anything that had been found on that FetLife profile. All of their friends and family would say the same, that it just didn't sound like her. In fact, one message said that her marriage wasn't entirely monogamous and that she, quote, cheats on her husband whenever she wants to. But anyone that knew her would tell you that that is absolutely not the case, and they would be shocked if that were at all true in any way. So if none of this is true and someone really is posing as Christine on this FetLife website, then who was Joseph talking to? Well, according to an article from People magazine, Deputy Commonwealth's attorney Eric Klingon says that Brendan allegedly created the profile and he began the communication with Joseph. I know. Big shocker, right? Then, days before the murders, Brendan told Juliana to call Joseph, posing as Christine, to confirm the details of what they were planning to do. And the plan was to use restraints and then cut off her clothing during violent role play. So allegedly, it was both of them. And if all of that is true, poor Joseph went over to the Banfields' house thinking that he was going to be engaging in consensual activity, and then he would have run into Christine in the house at some point, assumably, and she had no idea who he was or why he was there or what he was doing. The whole thing was a total setup for both of them. And to understand why Brendan and Juliana would want to do something like this, we've got to go over what investigators believe is the motive, which I am sure you can guess. I'll let you take a wild guess right now. Yeah, it was an affair. These two sickos, Brendan and Juliana, are said to have started an affair in August of 2022. And for the next several months, they allegedly concocted this sick plot to get rid of Christine so that they could be together. And another element to this, beyond the fact that they murdered the two of them, is the fact that they were willing to completely tarnish their reputations in the process. These two were willing to let the world believe very damaging things about these two innocent victims. For Christine, they were going to let the world think that she got herself killed as a result of her infidelity and sexual fantasies, which she didn't even have. And I want to be clear, there's no shame in these sexual fantasies, and definitely not trying to kink shame or anything like that. But when it's not true and it's made up, I mean, it's tarnishing your reputation. It's not the truth. And for Joseph, they were going to let the world think that he was some crazy sexual sadist who took things too far and actually killed someone when he thought he was just engaging in this consensual activity. In reality, we don't know exactly what happened over there, but there's a good chance that Joseph went into the home and started to act out the role play that he thought they consensually agreed to. I just can't imagine picturing how this played out is so upsetting. And even if what he was into is not your cup of tea, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what he liked, especially because he liked something that was consensual and believed that that's exactly what he was doing. And sources also say that Joseph really did not hide his sexual preferences from those who knew him. And the fact that these two tried to paint him as some sexually motivated killer, it just wasn't who he was at all. It's so sick. And for what? Because these two selfish fucking losers just wanted to be together and thought this was the best way to do so? God, it pisses me off. So between February, when Joseph and Christine were killed, and October, when the first arrest was made, they worked diligently during that time to build a case. Now, obviously, I'm pretty sure we're going to get a much clearer picture. In fact, I'm very sure we'll get a much clearer picture during trial. And let me know if you guys are interested in additional coverage on this case when the trial happens in October, unless it gets delayed again. Not totally sure there. But anyway, during that time, they believed that Juliana and Brendan plotted these murders to be together and strategically coordinated communication with Joseph to lure him to their home and make it look like he killed Christine, and then they killed him in an effort to protect her. And thankfully, as I just mentioned, in October, there was an arrest, one arrest, but this was October 13th, 2023. And interestingly, it was actually 23-year-old Juliana who they got first. She was arrested for the second-degree murder of Joseph Ryan, as well as the use of a firearm during the commission of a felony, because it was her gunshot, the one to his chest, that resulted in his death. And even though at this point, investigators already had evidence of an affair, when they went back to the home to arrest her, they found even more. And God, these two, they're so stupid. They weren't even trying to hide it. Because back in February, when the murders occurred, obviously they took pictures of the entire home, including the guest room that Juliana was staying in. And when they took those photos, which I will have on screen if you are watching this episode, you can see that her bedroom had clothes in the closet, like someone had been living in that room. But in October, when they went back to arrest her, her stuff had been moved out of that closet, and I'm sure you can guess where they were now. That's right, the primary bedroom, the master bedroom. She was already bunked up with Brendan. And not only that, her lingerie was laid out across Brendan's bed. And if you think these two cannot get any dumber, turns out they can, because there was a framed photo of the two of them on their bedside table. It hadn't even been a year since Christine was killed, and the two of them were already shacked up together and not even trying to hide it. I mean, you think they would be smart enough to kind of try to keep that under wraps, but no, they're leaving lingerie out, the photos next to the bed. I mean, you cannot make these things up. It's unbelievable that people would be this stupid and this evil, quite frankly, especially Brendan. This is your wife. This is the mother of your child. She hasn't even been gone for a year, and it was your fault, allegedly. Oh, it's hard to say that. He had just really moved on with his life as if nothing happened, and so did Juliana. Not only that, investigators also found suggestive texts between the two, as well as a photo of them on a romantic trip to New York, which had taken place before the murders occurred. And mind you, Juliana did try to say initially that they were not romantically involved. Bullshit. Did these two really expect anyone to believe that in the 8 months since your wife was brutally murdered in your own home, when you're supposed to be grieving, that the two of you just start hooking up? Absolutely not. No one buys it. And it doesn't matter if anyone buys it, because at the end of the day, the evidence proves that they were together before any of this was even planned or executed. But one thing Juliana, I'm sure, didn't plan for was going to prison. But what was interesting and frustrating to the public at this point was only Juliana was arrested, and her arrest only mentioned the murder of Joseph. And that's because at this point, investigators weren't saying who they thought killed Christine. And to my understanding, this is because they were still running tests to figure out who stabbed her. And obviously, like anyone with a brain, they had a pretty good feeling that it wasn't Joseph who did it, but they wanted to be absolutely certain, of course. So from that October through most of 2024, Brendan was, technically speaking, a free man. And he was living at home, his mom was staying there, and he was raising his daughter. But he certainly was not off the hook, because behind the scenes, investigators were monitoring his communications with Juliana while she was in jail. And one phone call in particular sparked their attention. In that call, Juliana said, and I quote, "I hope you are not just staying with me because you are afraid of me turning against you." To which Brendan allegedly responded to her saying, "Keep your mouth shut." So that certainly doesn't scream innocent, but of course, innocent is what she said she was. For over a year, Juliana said that she did not do what they were accusing her of, and during this time, her family stood by her side. They said that she never would have done something like this and had hopes that she would be released from custody. Her bond, however, thankfully was repeatedly denied. And in April of 2024, more information came out that would solidify her place behind bars. During a preliminary hearing in the beginning of that month, prosecutors dropped a massive bombshell. And that was, it turns out, that 2 months before the murders occurred, the two of them, Brendan and Juliana, had gone to the shooting range together. And it gets worse, because on January 28th, Brendan went back to that shooting range and purchased the same Glock that he and Juliana had practiced shooting with. And prosecutors brought receipts, quite literally. They used the serial number on the receipt from his purchase and matched it to a gun recovered at the scene. They also revealed that days before the murders, Juliana and Brendan both got new cell phones. But when Brendan was asked about any of this, he pleaded the fifth. I mean, he pretty much did this on every question they asked him. He had been subpoenaed to testify during this hearing, but he said a whole lot of nothing. He wouldn't even say whether or not he was married to Christine on the day that she was murdered. I mean, I get not wanting to incriminate yourself, but not answer that. I mean, dude, come on. Thankfully, though, with or without Brendan's testimony, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence to move forward with the case against Juliana. So later that month, she was officially indicted. And only hours after that, Joseph's mom said, and I quote, "I want people to remember Joe for the good-natured, loving man he was, for the man who loved his family. He loved other people. He was socially aware. He was a kind person. Another big sentiment that his mom shared with the public was that her son wasn't a violent person. She made it a point that you don't just wake up after 39 years and suddenly decide to become a killer. In her mind, in the mind of most of the public, and the mind of the prosecutors, he was lured and framed. But like I said, when it comes to the public and their perception of everything, especially in the earlier days, like early to mid 2024, there was a lot of confusion about what the truth really was. I mean, obviously, with Juliana's arrest, people were expecting Brendan to be arrested too. But months and months were going by, and there was no word about what was going on with that. And it was especially confusing because no one at this point had been charged with Christine's murder. And like I said, the reason it took so long is because, of course, they wanted to be 100% certain that their theory matched the evidence. I mean, they have one shot at this. And that theory was that Brendan stabbed his wife and then staged the scene to make it look like Joseph did it. And then forensic tests came back in August of 2024 that proved exactly that. Expert blood spatter analysis helped investigators finally prove that both bodies had been moved and repositioned after being wounded, and that Joseph's arms were moved and smeared with Christine's blood. And of course, this report was critical in making their arrest, which finally did come on September 16th. That day, Brendan Banfield was finally arrested and charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of using a firearm in the commission of a felony.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that due to the hard work of police and prosecutors, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office has secured an indictment against Brendan Banfield for the murder of his wife, Christine, and the murder of Mr. Ryan. Fairfax County police officers took Brendan Banfield into custody, and he's been brought to the same adult detention center where Juliana Perez Margulies has been since last year when she was arrested for the murder of Mr. Ryan. The great investigative work of the Fairfax County Police Department led us to new information, which was instrumental in securing today's indictment that charges Brendan Banfield with aggravated murder and the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. I'm extremely grateful to FCPD for their continuing efforts in this case, as well as the efforts of Deputy Commonwealth's Attorneys Kelsey Gill and Eric Klingen, who've worked tirelessly with their counterparts in the Fairfax County Police Department.
Now, when it comes to specific evidence against these two, I've only been able to share some of it with you. We obviously know about the affair and the blood spatter analysis, but things like their text messages and computer searches have not been shared publicly. I cannot imagine what we will learn when all of that comes out, which I'm pretty sure it will. We should be getting the full scoop on all of that during the trial, but for right now, a lot of information is being kept quiet, and it's likely for the best. So if you feel like there's gaps and things that don't fully make sense, you're not alone. I feel the same way. I'm still totally confused. But that's just how it goes when looking into cases before they actually go to trial, especially with limited information like this. But there's a reason they have to keep it that way. And honestly, piecing this case together and trying to understand and prepare for this episode was pretty difficult and confusing. But overall, I think the big picture here is pretty fucking clear. And that big picture is Brendan was cheating on his wife, and together he and Juliana conspired to murder her and frame an innocent man. But what's wild, however, not surprising really at all, is that Juliana was not the first woman that Brendan apparently had cheated on his wife with. One woman that he was seeing had actually come forward and said that Brendan used to talk about how life would be easier if his wife wasn't around. And I just have to say, for being a federal agent, Brendan is a massive idiot. I mean, I understand that working for the IRS is a little different than being, say, an FBI agent, but it's pretty wild how sloppy and stupid he was throughout all of this. Allegedly, of course. But let's get to the bond, the plea, and the trial. So good news when it comes to his bond. It was denied. Just like Juliana's, it was ruled that he had to stay behind bars until his trial. And right now, that is scheduled to begin in October of 2025. Prosecutors argued that Brendan was a flight risk, pointing out that he lived near 3 major airports and that he had been learning Portuguese, suggesting that he might have been preparing for a life in Brazil. In fact, a Washington Post article reported that the two of them had plans to go to Brazil in October of 2023, months after the murders. Meaning these two dummies really thought they were going to get away with this and then jet off to Brazil. Or they thought, hey, if they start catching on to us, we can just go to Brazil and hide. Either way, Just dumb. And it turns out Brendan even got Juliana a second passport because her original passport had been seized on the day of the murders, which of course looks very suspicious, very shady, and absolutely warrants him not being granted bail. However, the defense said that he absolutely should be granted it so that he can take care of his daughter. The same daughter that he allowed to be in the basement while he allegedly murdered her mother. Okay, make that make sense. So I'm very glad that his bail was denied, and same with Juliana, who, get this, ended up taking a plea deal right before her trial. Her trial was initially scheduled for November of 2024, but on October 29th, she ended up accepting a deal. The attorney has said that the information leading to this agreement can't be made public because Brendan is still going to trial. But we do know that in return for pleading guilty, cooperating with authorities, and testifying against Brendan, prosecutors agreed to reduce her charge from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter and drop the firearm-related charge. There's also talk about her being released with credit for time served after she testifies against Brendan. And since his trial has been postponed, I'm guessing that her sentencing hearing will be postponed as well. Right now, as of the day I am recording this episode, her hearing is scheduled for March 21st, and it was supposed to be after Brendan's trial. But now that his trial is in October of 2025, I'll have to keep my eyes out and see if her hearing is adjusted as well. But based on her charges, she is facing up to 10 years, so I'm interested to see how that all ends up playing out.
Just yesterday, Juliana Perez-Magalhaes told prosecutors that she and Brendan Banfield, that husband, used a fetish website to lure a stranger to the couple's Herndon home back in February of last year. Prosecutors say the man hired thought he was there for a consensual sexual encounter with Banfield's wife, Christine.
According to the au pair's testimony, the man was supposed to tie down Christine Banfield and use a knife to cut off her clothing. Christine had no idea about the plot. Yesterday, the au pair testified that she and Brendan Banfield interrupted the act that they set up. The au pair says Banfield shot the man they allegedly hired and then stabbed his wife to death. She says the man was still alive, so she also shot and killed him. As part of yesterday's agreement, the au pair pleaded guilty to a downgraded charge of manslaughter.
Attorneys for Magalhaes say that she will testify against Brendan Banfield at his murder trial. In exchange, they're seeking credit for time served, and they want her released at the end of the trial.
Now, in her confession, Juliana has said that even though she was part of the plan, she didn't think that Brendan would actually follow through with it. ABC 7 reports that according to the plea agreement, there were many points where she didn't want to move forward with the plan. But the problem with that is, I think we can agree here, right, is that she did move forward with it. I think making that whole argument of, I didn't think he was actually going to do it, I really didn't want to, is just such a massive slap in the face to these victims and their families. I mean, she had countless opportunities to go to the police at any time and report what Brendan was involving her in, report what they were planning to do, and she just didn't. So I don't really understand how that can be an excuse at all. And I don't care where she's from. Murder is universally wrong. And this is why plea agreements are so tricky, and I get so frustrated because obviously they're very necessary. It's going to be important to help put Brendan away, especially if he was truly the main mastermind behind it all. And that testimony is going to be crucial, but it's just so frustrating. What, at the end of the day, she just gets to walk away with less, even though she was part of it all from the beginning? She literally shot and killed an innocent man who they were trying to frame and was going to just move on and marry this man, Brendan, or I guess I don't know if they were going to get married, but they were together and trying to move on with their lives after these two were murdered. It's so evil. And to think that she will get a lesser sentence after all of that, it's just mind-boggling. Again, I get why. I'm sure you can all agree with me. It's just frustrating, right? But I really do hope that her testimony will be crucial in getting Brendan put away for a very, very long time. She is going to be able to speak on certain things that will definitely be crucial in understanding what actually happened, including the McDonald's stop and the 2 911 calls and just the overall planning for it, how it actually happened since she was there. And let's talk about that McDonald's stop for a second, because earlier I said that Brendan's phone placed him at McDonald's when Juliana called him to come to the home that morning. That call was at 7:37 a.m., but it's been reported that he needed to be at work at 7:30. And because of that, it's believed that he may have been purposely waiting there to get a call from her to come home. So she should be able to speak more about why he was in the McDonald's parking lot for so long. And then there's those 911 calls. I mentioned earlier that the reporting here is a bit funky, that there's conflicting reports when it comes to the 911 call or 911 calls. Not really sure how many there were, but we do know that at least that initial 911 call, the dispatcher hears moaning and then the call ended. And then 13 minutes later, the main 911 call was made. Now, personally, I can't say exactly what that initial 911 call was about, the moaning one. I don't know if it was on purpose or not. And maybe Juliana will be able to explain that in more detail. However, I will say it has been suggested that the delay in these calls could have been when Brendan was staging the scene. As we know, part of the reason he was arrested was because they found evidence that the bodies had been moved. So I'm definitely curious to see what Juliana will say about this. Who was the one moaning? I mean, I'm guessing it was probably Christine, considering she was still alive at that point, which is just, God, it's so horrible to think about what she must have been going through. I mean, how painful and how confused she must have been. God, it's just so evil. And then I'm also really curious to see what she will have to say about the fetish website. And I mean, based on what I told you guys, I'm guessing that she's probably going to try and turn it all on Brendan. And I mean, after all, he did tell another woman that he was having an affair with that things would be easier if his wife wasn't around. Allegedly. Now, obviously, if you ask me, and I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, agree with me that all signs here are pointing to guilty, allegedly. That's just my opinion. Of course, he is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But here's another little interesting detail that has come out about Brendan. Okay, so this came from a recorded jail call where he reportedly said the nanny can't keep her goddamn mouth shut. And obviously, you don't just say those types of things unless you've got something to hide. So I think karma is going to come for him big time. And I do really feel confident that prosecutors are doing everything that they can to build their case up as strongly as possible. And in December of this past year, very recently, they ended up adding some additional charges to the ones that he is already facing, including felony child abuse and neglect, as well as felony child cruelty. Now, specific details on those charges haven't been shared, but we do know that's related to what happened on the day of the murders. And if he did do what he's accused of doing, I think that those child-related charges are more than fair, and I'm very happy to see those brought forward. I just have such a hard time wrapping my head around how any parent could bring their child knowingly into a situation like that. I mean, that's just pure evil. But I guess maybe I shouldn't be shocked, because if he's willing to kill 2 innocent people, one being his wife, the mother of his child, and one being someone he doesn't even know, then I guess I shouldn't be surprised that he doesn't give a damn about his daughter's well-being. So I am very curious and also very anxious to see how this trial ends up playing out. I hope that it's not delayed any sooner and that justice is around the corner. Kind of. I mean, I guess we've got some time to wait, but hopefully it's not much longer than we have to wait at this point. And oh my gosh, I hope that he is found guilty. Like I said earlier, I'm pretty confident that that will be the case, but you just never know how these things are going to play out. So it definitely makes me nervous. I did mention earlier that at this point, they aren't saying much about how their daughter is doing other than she's okay and in the care of loved ones. So I'm happy to hear that. And I have seen it reported that Christine's parents are in the process of getting custody of her. And if anyone deserves to have custody of this poor child, it's them. And I hope, and I'm confident again, that that will be the case. I mean, it should be. I don't see why it wouldn't. I really wish I had more answers in this case, more of a resolution for you all. I wish justice was already here. But like I said, it should be coming soon. Let's all hope, at least. But I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this one, so let me know below. And I'm definitely curious if you would be interested in some trial coverage as well, because I certainly would like to do that. And let's just all hope as hard as we can, cross our fingers and toes, that there will be justice for Christine and Joseph, because they definitely deserve it. And I'm just so sorry for their loved ones, their friends and family. Just such an unnecessary tragedy that must have been so hard for all of them to wrap their minds around, especially the two of them as they were going through it. I mean, imagine how confused, like I said, how confused they must have been in those moments and scared. It's so horrific. Did one of them have to watch the other? Just, God, it's so horrible. I'll never understand how fucking evil people can be. It just, I don't know. No matter how long I've been doing this, it just continually blows me away. But yeah, anyway, that's all I have on this one. Definitely want to hear from you guys, so let me know. I'll be back next week to discuss another case, but until then, stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Rae. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you are new, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you, and make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. Okay, guys, so today we are going to be talking about a case that was requested in my members only form, and I can't believe I hadn't heard of this case. I have to just right off the bat tell you that this is a very heavy one, and it was very hard to research and prepare for. I was able to learn a lot about Sierra Joggin, and I was just so impressed with the young woman that she was. She was such an interesting, special, unique, kind, creative person, and for her life to have ended at 20 years old is just, it's hard to even wrap your mind around. Her family has done so much to honor her memory, and I think it's really important that people know more about her and know her story. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. Before I get into the case, I did want to tell you guys some great news. I'm very excited to share with you the impact that Higher Hope was able to make in our first only 4 months of running our foundation. If you missed last week's episode, I just again wanted to say thank you to everyone who has donated so far or participated in our holiday matching program. We've raised quite a bit, and that is all going to be put to great use in 2025. But in our first 4 months in 2024, we were able to award 14 different grants at a total of $99,821. And I am very, very proud of that. We could not have done this without all of your support on all of our shows, all of your donations. This was a combination of Hope and Empower grants, and I could not have done this. My team could not have done this without all of your support by just watching our shows or making direct donations. It means so much to us. And also, I wanted to thank our sponsors who also make this possible. If you want to follow along with us, you can follow us on Instagram or head to our website at any time. And if you're interested in making an impact yourself, you can make a donation at our website, which is higherhope.org. I'm very excited to see what we're able to do in 2025, and hopefully we just keep, taking it a mile higher. But let's go ahead and get into Sierra's case, because we do have quite a bit to go over. And I want to start out, as I always do, by telling you more about who Sierra was. Sierra Catherine Joggin, or Cece, as she was lovingly called when she was a kid, was born on February 11th, 1996 in Sylvania, Ohio, to her parents Sheila and Tom. She was actually the only child that came from their relationship, but in total, she would end up having 4 siblings after her parents split up, 2 on her dad's side and 2 on her mom's. And it's kind of funny, her mom actually wasn't sure if she wanted to have any more kids because Sierra was a perfect baby. Like, even when she was bad, she was still good. For example, there was this one time while they were on a family trip in the Bahamas, and I guess she had kind of gotten into trouble for something and they couldn't find her for a minute. And then all of a sudden, they ended up finding her in the closet, and she told them that she had put herself in timeout. And from a young age, Sierra just always seemed to be self-aware, well-intentioned, and very sure of exactly who she was. Oh, and definitely confident. Sierra was a very confident person, and that just comes across in any videos of her, any pictures of her, any stories that you hear about her. Her mom, Sheila, says that Sierra's confidence really just started at a young age. And even as she grew older, when most girls, unfortunately, tend to lose some of their confidence over time, that really was never the case for her. And when I say confident, I don't mean that in a cocky type of way. She was just very sure of who she was. She knew who she was, and she was happy to be who she was. And she was also that type of person that could bring anyone out of their shell and always made sure that everyone around her felt included. Now, one of the most important women in her life, aside from her mom, was her Aunt Tara. She was Sierra's aunt on her mom's side, and since she was only 16 years old when Sierra was born, it really fostered a very close relationship between the two of them. She was kind of like her sister, aunt, and sort of second mom all in one. And when she and her husband Howard had 4 kids of their own, Sierra was practically her 5th. She would go on their family vacations, and they would include her in everything they did as if she was their own daughter. And one thing about Sierra that everyone seemed to just love about her is that she just didn't have an off switch. She was all gas, no brakes, all the time, full of energy and full of life. She was just someone that people loved to be around, and she loved to be around people as well, and also loved to make people laugh. I think the best way to put it is that Sierra was someone who not only found joy in everyday life, but she was someone who brought joy to everyone else's everyday life. She also loved to travel, she loved to exercise, she loved to spend time with her friends, and as I'm sure you can already tell, she had no problems in the friend department. She went to Evergreen High School where she played for the volleyball team and was definitely the life of every party. And I think something that people really loved about her and something that I loved learning about her is that she just didn't take life that seriously, even when she was in high school. And that's a time where most of us take life too seriously, if that makes sense. But for example, she was not even on the cheerleading squad, but she would still wear a cheerleading uniform or outfit or whatever around at school just because she liked it. She also had a boyfriend, a really great guy named Josh Kolasinski. And when everything that I'm about to tell you happened in 2016, they had already been dating for 7 years. Their parents were actually friends when they were growing up, and sources say that they'd known one another since they were as young as 6. And what started as a friendship turned into a relationship kind of around middle school, and they never looked back. Everyone in their lives just knew that the two of them were a package deal from very early on. Wherever Sierra was, there was Josh. Wherever there was Josh, there was Sierra. And even when they were young, they were already starting to have conversations about wanting to get married one day. Sierra did want to wait just a little bit longer, sort of get her career jump started. But at the end of the day, it was always going to be the two of them. Their relationship was really so beautiful, and it didn't matter what they were doing. Josh said that they were always having a good time. They did fun things like parties and school dances and even skydiving. But Josh has said that some of their best moments together was when they didn't have anything to do and they were just bored and found ways to entertain themselves together. And because of where they were living, they definitely had to make their own fun quite a bit of the time. I mentioned earlier that Sierra was born in Sylvania, Ohio, but she actually grew up 10 miles down the road in Metamora, which is where this case takes place. Now, Metamora is about 24 miles west of Toledo, and the most accurate way I can describe it from my research is rural. Very rural and corn. Lots of corn. Based on the 2016 census, Metamora had a population of only 617 people, so we're talking very, very small. But from what I can tell, Sierra really loved living there, so much so that after her sophomore year of college, where she was attending the University of Toledo, she decided to spend that summer living back at home at her grandparents' house, which was about a mile or so down the road from her mom's house. In school, Sierra was a member of the National Honor Society and took learning very seriously. In her first 2 years, she was studying business, specializing in human resource management. And the summer that she was home, she had both an internship and a personal assistant job. Her internship was for Ice Industries, which is actually her Uncle Howard's company, and long story short, she was on a path towards getting a job there after graduation. She was also planning on moving in with her Aunt Tara and Uncle Howard in the upcoming school year. It would be a very easy location for her to live because they lived super close to campus. So as you can tell, Sierra had a very bright future ahead of her and was really going to continue to impact people's lives for years to come, but that was all ripped away from her on July 19th, 2016. It was a Tuesday, and her mom, Sheila, remembers it being a completely normal day. She got up, she went to work, and at one point in the day, she connected with Sierra over the phone to coordinate a family movie night because Secret Life of Pets was coming out. Sierra wanted everyone to go and see it. She also remembers that she and Sierra were planning on talking later that evening about Sierra studying abroad in the fall. That summer, she had been working to get her passport up to date so that she could leave the country and study abroad, which I'm sure she was very excited about. And the updated passport was actually supposed to come in the mail that evening. But they didn't really get the chance to talk about it because Sierra decided that she wanted to ride her bike, which actually was a new bike, over to Josh's house. She'd recently gotten this purple mountain bike from a garage sale, and since their family had just come home from a vacation, she was really eager to go and see Josh. So sometime around 5 p.m., she gets on her new bike and heads off to Josh's house. And he actually lived 7 miles away from her, but like I've already mentioned, she was a very active person, and this was no big deal to her, although it was a very hot day in July, and Josh said that she seemed pretty tired when she did get to his house, but she got there, she made it there, everything was fine. They spent just a little bit of quality time together because she did have to head back home because Josh actually had plans with another friend that night. So she was always just going to stop by for a little bit and then head back. So a little after 6:30 p.m., she leaves his house. However, this time she wasn't riding alone because Josh actually decided to ride his motorcycle alongside of her. And I really thought this was very sweet, but he just didn't like the idea of her riding home by herself. Even though the way home should have been very safe, I mean, it's very rural. I'm talking like a few houses and just cornfields all the way back. He still wanted to make sure she made it home safely, and he had no reason to believe she wouldn't, but he just wanted to be sure. Now, during the few miles that they rode together, Josh ended up recording 2 different Snapchat videos, and in these videos, they look like they're having such a great time. It's honestly so heartbreaking to look at these, especially when you know what is about to happen. And I just hope that those last few moments that she had with Josh were special to her and filled with laughter and joy, because in just a matter of moments, it was all gone. And here's how that happened. While they were riding home together on County Road 6, Sierra ends up telling Josh that she's got it from here, he can take off, and it was okay for him to turn around and just go back home. She was a very headstrong person, someone very independent, someone you'd almost never win an argument with. So she insisted that she didn't need him to escort her the entire way home. And he actually did push back at first. He really wanted to take her all the way home, but she really insisted that she was okay. She assured him she was going to make it home just fine, and so eventually he did agree, and that was about another mile into the journey. So they went about 2 miles together before he turned around. They got to Evergreen High School. When they finally stopped, Josh gave her a kiss. He told her that he loved her and said, "Text me when you get home." But that text never came. And at first, Josh didn't really freak out. He did say that normally she was very good about sending him a quick text, letting him know that she had made it somewhere safely, but he didn't want to panic, and it hadn't been that long, so he just sort of kept his eye on his phone and figured that she would eventually text him. Meanwhile, her mom was also experiencing sort of a strange feeling, but just like him, she didn't freak out right away. That evening, she had taken her 2 younger kids to Taekwondo class, and on her way home, she had to stop at her mom's house. I mentioned earlier that Sierra had been living with her grandparents, but what I didn't mention yet is that Sheila's younger daughter was also staying there. And she remembers that as she was pulling in to drop her other daughter off, she noticed that Sierra's bedroom light was off. And she thought it was kind of strange because it was only 9 p.m. It was pretty early for Sierra to go to sleep. But she figured that, maybe she was just tired. She'd been busy lately and didn't think too much of it. She just took note of that. However, the weird feeling that she was experiencing turned into a full-blown panic a little over an hour later when Josh called her at 10:15 p.m. and asked if she had heard from Sierra. He still hadn't gotten a text from her. And every time that he tried calling her, her phone was going straight to voicemail. So he was getting really concerned, and he thought, maybe she had reached out to her mom and just wasn't calling him back or answering for some reason. But he quickly panicked as well when he heard that Sheila also hadn't heard from Sierra. So at that point, Sheila reaches out to her mom, and it was the same thing. Not only was Sierra not in her room, but her bike wasn't in the barn either. And right away, everyone had this horrible gut-sinking feeling. This was completely out of character for Sierra. So they all end up getting in their cars and driving around trying to find her. And at first, they were thinking that maybe she had some type of horrible bike accident. maybe she had been hit by a car, wasn't able to get in touch with them, that she was injured on the side of the road somewhere. Maybe she was unconscious, something like that. So Josh heads out and starts looking along the route that they had taken together. And then Sheila went in a different direction towards a neighboring town, which she didn't think that Sierra had likely gone that way, but she wanted to cover their bases. And also, that was the direction of the fire station where she ended up going and finding a sheriff's deputy sitting in their car right out front. And that's when she frantically explained what was going on and that she desperately needed help. But unfortunately, like we hear so often, her pleas for help were met with some resistance. At first, she got the whole, she's 20 years old, she has every right to leave speech. But, Sheila is like, that is not what is going on here. I know my daughter. This doesn't make sense. And she was not going to take that as an answer. So at that point, she makes a 911 call of her own and several more calls after that to make sure that something was being done. And meanwhile, her Aunt Tara was calling local hospitals to see if anyone matching Sierra's description had been brought in. And there actually was a brief moment where they thought they had found her. A hospital in Detroit had an unidentified woman come in who had a belly button piercing just like Sierra and also had a scar on her calf that was just like Sierra's, but it didn't end up being her, which of course only added to the fear that her loved ones were feeling. So they continued to do what they could, which was posting online and organizing search groups in hopes that she would be found quickly. And thankfully, by around 11:30 p.m., it was all hands on deck with the local sheriff's department. One deputy, Matt Smithmither, was woken up that night by a family member who explained what was going on, and he jumped right out of bed to help. He started making some calls and really just helped kick things into gear. And a discovery was made that very night. Right around midnight, a different deputy and his canine were patrolling County Road 6 looking for any sign of Sierra when he came across some matted down corn stalks, which of course, given the circumstances, was something worth looking into. And when he got closer, that's when he saw it. 3 to 4 rows deep in the corn, his flashlight reflected off of Sierra's purple mountain bike. It was standing up on its kickstand, and based on the fact that it was left a few rows deep, he immediately believed that someone was trying to conceal it. And upon further inspection, he realized why. The bike had what appeared to be blood on both the seats and the handlebars. So right away, backup was called, and minutes later, the entire area was just swarming with law enforcement. And they ended up finding several other key pieces of evidence, including a fuse box, a pair of women's sunglasses, a pair of men's sunglasses, an orange-handled screwdriver with blood on it, and also a green sock. And they also said that there was a strong smell of gasoline, motorcycle tire tracks, and most notably, blood stains on several corn stalks. And of course, with all that, it was immediately undeniable that this was the scene of an abduction. Maybe not a murder, at least they hoped not, but definitely the scene of a violent struggle at the very least. And so that night, Sierra's family ends up getting a call from someone that they knew that there was a ton of law enforcement by the cornfields not far from their home. And so, of course, they all rushed to go see what was going on. But when they got there, no one would tell them anything. So it wasn't until hours later that an Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation agent came by their house to tell them about what they had found. And that news was, you can't even put it into words. This was just confirmation for them that something horrible had to have happened to Sierra, something far worse than a biking accident. And so from that moment forward, they're dealing with a whole new set of fears. Not only was Sierra missing, but she's missing because someone took her. So they needed to figure out who that person is, why they took her, and where they were keeping her. And I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to you, but the first person of interest, of course, was Josh. Not only because he was the last person with her, but also because he was riding a motorcycle that night. And considering that a fuse box and motorcycle tire tracks were found at the scene, he just seemed like the most likely person. Plus, statistically speaking, it would make sense, right? So the next day, on July 20th, he was questioned. And by that morning, local investigators and BCI agents had set up a mobile command center at Evergreen High School, and that's where Josh was spoken to. And he was, right off the bat, extremely cooperative.
We sat around for a little while. It was probably half hour, 45 minutes. We sat there and deciphered whether I should take her home or whether she wanted to ride her bike back. And she said she wanted to ride a bike, and I had my motorcycle, and I figured, I'll follow her for a little bit and just kind of give her crap through stuff like that. So I followed her. She left. I followed her down the street, and I said, "All right." She said, "Like, you can leave now." So, guess you're back. Turn around. Wow.
What do you think?
What
do you think?
what happened? I don't know. I honest to God have no idea. I don't know if it was someone she knew. And that's what Amy was doing. Sierra is a scrapper. She is a strong girl. And if someone came up for her, she would have put up a fight. I guarantee it. Unless it happened like that. Unless it was, I can see her having her music in, you don't even hear someone coming off, and it's just bam. That'd be the only way.
He told them absolutely everything that he knew and even offered to draw a map of his and Sierra's movements from the evening before. He also agreed to let them search his house and his truck because he had nothing to hide. At one point, they did find a pair of bloody coveralls in his truck, but they ended up confirming that it was animal blood from a hunting trip. And even though he was innocent, Josh, of course, as anyone would be, was terrified. Not only terrified for Sierra and what she's going through or what could have happened, but the idea that they think that he might have been involved, I mean, that's really scary, especially for a young person like him. Thankfully, though, pretty quickly, investigators did come to the conclusion that he was telling the truth, and that was partially because of a new piece of evidence that they found that they could not connect to him. But it was evidence that definitely belonged to whoever was responsible. That same day, July 20th, the community was going as hard as possible in their search for Sierra. Law enforcement didn't even need much help rallying people to look for her because everyone was just already doing it. And it hadn't even been 24 hours. Yet you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't know what happened or wasn't already out there searching, which is exactly how this piece of evidence was brought to their attention. It turns out that the night before, a farmer and his son were driving home on County Road 6 when they noticed a black motorcycle helmet on the side of the road. And without even giving it a second thought, they pulled over, picked it up, and continued driving home. And then it wasn't until the next day that the farmer heard about what had happened and was like, oh, wait, that helmet we found was pretty close to where they're saying the crime scene was. So he immediately got in contact with police and turned it over to them. And thank God he did, because when they took a closer look at it, they could see that it was covered in blood-like stains, and that one of those stains was a partial palm print, which, of course, suggested that this helmet might have been used to strike Sierra during her abduction. And because Josh was able to prove that the helmet didn't belong to him, it was helpful in clearing him. But obviously now they're stuck with the question of whose helmet is this? They did submit it and all those other items for DNA testing right away, but of course, those tests take time. And time was something they just didn't have because nobody knew if Sierra was alive or not, and they just couldn't wait on test results to make their next move. So they began a bunch of other methods to try and find her, starting with pinging her phone, which is an obvious first step in a missing persons investigation, and unfortunately they did not have any luck with that because the ping took them right back to the abduction site. They also weren't able to get anything off her Fitbit, which they knew that she was wearing because of those Snapchat videos. So at that point, their best bet was to continue with the ground searches. So those searches carried on all day Wednesday with the help of several law enforcement agencies, canine units, helicopter crews, family, friends, community members, but even with hundreds of volunteers, nobody found anything. There was a report of a van that had been apparently speeding through the area on the day that Sierra went missing, and that created a lot of concern because Toledo is actually a sex trafficking hub, and as I mentioned earlier, they were only 25 minutes from the city. So, they started thinking the worst there. But then they ended up finding the driver of that van and cleared him. And then there was also a woman who reported that at 7:20 p.m. on the 19th, she was driving down County Road 6 when she saw something strange. She saw a man bent over at the waist, about 2 or 3 rows deep in the corn, along with a bike lying on the side of the road. And she actually didn't think much of it at the time, but once she heard about Sierra, she thought it might be an important detail to the case. And she describes this man as a white male wearing red shorts and possibly a white t-shirt. So law enforcement didn't have too much to work with there. So that left them once again scratching their heads with no idea where to turn to next, feeling frustrated, but luckily that didn't last too long. Because of how many volunteers were helping comb through these cornfields, officers were able to utilize their time conducting door-to-door searches. And one of these doors belonged to a man named James Dean Worley. And what's crazy is they went to this guy's house on only a hunch, but within moments of talking to him, they realized that this was their guy. On July 21st, 3 law enforcement agents went to James Worley's home, which, mind you, was located only 5 miles from where Sierra was abducted. And this sicko wasted no time getting chatty. And right off the bat, I just need to tell you guys, this guy is a fucking freak. Like, it did not take long at all for them to figure out that something is seriously off with this guy. And as soon as they knocked on the door and explained why they were there, James let them in and insisted that they all sit down. And they were like, no, it's cool. We're not going to be here long. We don't need to sit. But he was like, no, you're going to sit down and you're going to listen to me. Overall, right away, the whole situation was just a giant red flag. I mean, for starters, James was looking rough. He had visible scratches and bruises all over his body that were clearly defense wounds. So, they're getting red flags from that alone. But then he opens his dumb mouth and starts word vomiting some of the most outrageous things I have ever heard. And as soon as he starts blabbing, one of the officers is like, okay, we need to record this. So he gets out his phone and starts trying to subtly record him. James, gets a feeling that he's being recorded. So he gets all sketchy about him having his phone. The officer lies to him and tells him that he's just texting his boss, but he is secretly recording him. And thankfully he did. I mean, they really had to, because this idiot was immediately placing himself at the crime scene on the night it happened. So here's his full story, okay? According to James, around 5:45 or 6 o'clock on the evening of July 19th, he left his house to go ride his motorcycle. And while he was driving through County Road 6, his motorcycle stalled out. So he pulls off to the side of the road where he apparently ends up coming across not one, but 2 bikes, a gray one and a blue one. And try to stick with me as I attempt to explain this the way that James did, because quite frankly, this dude is a real fucking idiot. And so none of what he said really makes sense. But he basically said that his plan was to ditch his motorcycle and then walk home. But since he had back problems, he instead decides that he's going to ride one of these bikes that he found all the way home. However, after standing there and thinking about it, he decides that he is not going to take one of the bikes. Instead, he's going to try and push his motorcycle home, like walk besides it, which of course doesn't make any sense because he just said that he has back problems and can't really walk that far. So makes a whole lot of sense, right? That if you can't walk, might as well try pushing a motorcycle and walking at the same time. But like I said, dude's an idiot.
Let's get back so we can get out of here and you can take care of mom. Oh, okay. It's on the 2 bikes. I'm pushing, and there's a cornfield, and I'm about half a mile down the road. Okay. There's 2 bikes sitting right in the wheat field. So back to the story here. I'm pushing my bike, and I had to stop, and there was bicycles sitting there. And I thought to myself, I ain't going to stay out here. I pushed my bike into the cornfield because the end rows are open. I was in my head thinking, I'm going to ditch this thing, but there's these bikes here. This was probably my bike and somebody else's bike. There was a blue one and a charcoal gray one, a light charcoal gray color. Anyways, I'm right there and I'm over boiling, and I look across the wheat field. I don't see no kids or nothing. There's nobody on the road. I didn't see anybody. Okay. And I thought, man, I'm going to stick my bike in here and I'm going to walk home. Problem is, I can't walk because the sciatic nerve.
So you leave the bike in the cornfield?
I was thinking about it, and I went ahead and I got it inside me, and I thought, now don't go wrapping this up in your head. So go to the bike and attack the chick. That ain't, no. Well, so I screwed with it for a while, and I took a break, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to turn this around, which I did. I got it back out, and I commenced to pushing. And then I made it home here about 10 o'clock.
Now, 2 things to note about his story. Okay, so first of all, the whole thing about there being 2 bikes there is not true. He was just trying to convince officers that someone else had been there with Sierra. And 2, and I'm sure this is obvious, but his whole story was a way to explain why his DNA would be on her bike. And he could not have been more obvious because he even asks in the interview if they found his DNA on it.
So are you really hitting every house up and down?
Yep.
Or
There's a whole bunch.
did you find my fingerprints on a bike or something? Is there any information like that coming back on me?
So the bullshit detector is clearly going off for these officers. He not only placed himself at the scene and came up with a nonsense story about the bike, but then he dropped some more info, which was really the icing on the stupid cake. James told them that when he left the area, he lost a few of his belongings. And do you want to guess what those items were? It was a pair of sunglasses, an orange-handled screwdriver, a fuse box, and drum roll please, his helmet. And he just offered this up to officers on a silver platter.
I had traffic issue with my bike here the other day. I dealt with it the best I could. I never saw anyone. I saw 2 bicycles. That's it. My helmet's gone. My fuses are gone. My screwdriver's gone. And my glasses are gone.
Because keep in mind, none of that information had been made public. Okay? It was so obvious right away that he was the one who was responsible, but he definitely wasn't going to admit that. In fact, he makes multiple weird comments that he's not out there killing chicks and raping chicks and stealing people. And at one point, he mentions how he recently had a girl come to his house, but she left alive. And the way he delivered that information is so strange. Like he's trying to be like, well, someone was recently at my house, a girl, in fact, and she's not dead, as if one person leaving his house alive proves that he didn't kill someone else.
I'm not out there killing chicks, dude. I don't have relationships. I mean, I'm in fact trying to get one started online a little bit right now. But, and she's been out here. And guess what? She went home alive.
So yeah, it was pretty obvious to officers right away that he was their guy. I mean, he had to have been the one responsible by the way that he was acting. Everything he was saying was so bizarre and coming from a place of like aggression, but then trying to cover tracks that didn't even need to be covered yet. I mean, he was the one who put the target on his back, which is crazy because really they only went to his place on a hunch. And even though they're now definitely feeling like he has got to be a suspect, he's likely the one responsible, they don't want to let him know that they're thinking that because in their minds, maybe Sierra is still alive and they don't want him making any sudden moves if that's the case. So they decided to leave and let him think that everything was fine, even if just for a few hours while they obtained a search warrant, which of course they went to go get right away. And then they start looking more into this man's background, and what they found left them speechless and is certainly going to leave you speechless as well. It turns out that back in 1990, James was convicted of a crime that was eerily similar to Sierra's disappearance. On July 4th, 1990, Robin Gardner was a 26-year-old girl living in White House, Ohio with her mom. And just for your reference, White House is only about 20 minutes away from where Sierra lived. And so on that day, July 4th, 1990, Robin decides she had nothing else to do. It was a holiday and she wants to go for a bike ride. And she remembers that she had ridden about a mile away from her house before she decided that was far enough and that she should probably turn around and go back home. But just as she makes that decision, she heard a car approaching and thought, I'm just going to wait for them to pass and then I'll turn around. So the truck passes and she circles the other way. And then almost out of nowhere, she goes flying off her bike and lands in a ditch. And it was because the driver of the truck had turned around and hit her. And at first she thought it was an accident because the driver got out of the car and was seeing if she was okay. But just a split second later, he'd taken a hammer out and smashed her on the back of the head. Luckily, she didn't end up passing out, but because she was still conscious, the guy got out a screwdriver and pressed it to her neck. She's screaming at this point, and he tells her that he would kill her if she didn't stop screaming and get into his truck with him. So Robin ends up fighting against him as hard as she could the entire time that he dragged her into his car, and she continued fighting when she was in the car as well. However, he still manages to get a handcuff onto her right wrist. Luckily, he wasn't able to do so on her left wrist, so she grabs the steering wheel and just starts screaming and screaming and screaming, hoping that someone will hear her. But of course, they were on a very rural road, a lot like the one that Sierra was abducted on. And the odds of someone driving by or hearing her were extremely slim. But by some sort of miracle, really, a motorcyclist just happens to drive by, and because Robin had made such a commotion, he stopped and he helped her escape. The two of them rode right to her house where they called the police, and what's insane is that when the motorcyclist took the police back to where he found Robin, her attacker was still there. And who do you think it was? Yep, that's right. It was James Worley. And of course, he had a ridiculous story for the police. He basically tells them that he was just driving and then Robin swerved into his car. And when he got out to check on her, she began acting hysterically. So he thinks it's a good idea to put handcuffs on her while he goes and gets help. In what world does that make any sense? Of course, it just doesn't. And the police agreed. So he was arrested for attempted abduction. But he only ended up serving 3 years out of a 6 to 10 year sentence for good behavior. And what's so maddening is he literally told his court-ordered therapist that he'd bury the next one. And yet they still let him out. Unbelievable. And as you can imagine, this was so traumatic for Robin, so much so that she moved to California, where she felt a lot safer. But even still, she says that she can't be alone because she's scared that if something ever happened to her again, nobody would ever hear her scream. And believe it or not, probably you're on the side of believe it with this guy, but there were probably others that he did this to as well. And that brings me to Claudia Tinsley. In September of 1996, a 24-year-old mother named Claudia Tinsley was reported missing by her mom after she failed to come home one evening. Claudia was a sex worker, and on the night that she disappeared, James Worley came to her house and picked her up. And according to James, the two of them drove around for 45 minutes, had oral sex, and then he dropped her off at an unknown location. Her mom got worried, of course, when she didn't come home, so she told police that James Worley was the guy that she had been with last. And of course, as you're probably picking up on, James is just someone who is a walking red flag, and her mother had a weird feeling about him as soon as she met him, and so she had actually written down his license plate, thankfully. And of course, James swears up and down that he didn't kill her, which of course none of us believe, but they brought him in for questioning a week after she disappeared, but ultimately they couldn't prove that he did something to her. So he was never arrested. They did end up getting a search warrant for his place a couple years later, but ultimately they didn't find anything that connected him to Claudia. Well, they did actually find some weed, so they were able to send his ass back to prison for 2 years for that, but that was pretty inconsequential considering what they suspected him of doing. And it's heartbreaking, but to this day, Claudia has never been found. So technically, James's involvement in Claudia's disappearance is alleged, but the fact that him of all people was the last guy to see her, I mean, to me, just tells you everything you need to know. I can't sit here legally and say that he did it because there's no proof that he did and it's all alleged, but yeah, I'm sure we can all agree how we feel on that one. But getting back to Sierra's disappearance, obviously, as investigators are learning all of this, they needed to get back to his property ASAP. So later that same day, they returned to his house to ask him more questions. And when they got there, this jackass has the audacity to ask for his helmet back, which of course officers are like, no, my dude, that is not going to happen. This time though, they outright told him that they found blood on the helmet, which James was like, oh no, that's not possible. But this time around, he seemed very agitated and very nervous. Now, he did allow them to walk around his property, but he made sure to stay close by. Now, as for his house, it more or less looked okay. I mean, it was messy, but besides that, it didn't look like Sierra had been there. But it was the barn where the real horrors were waiting. And they didn't even need to go inside to know that something was in there. Because as soon as they started to approach it, James's whole demeanor changed. He seemed like he really didn't want them to go inside, but of course they did anyway. And what they found was truly horrifying. I mean, for starters, the barn reeked of bleach, like someone had clearly been trying to clean up something, which they could also tell because there were fresh rake marks on the ground. They also noticed that the glass on the door to the barn had been spray painted black, as if someone was trying to prevent other people from seeing inside. Then it got even worse because as they're poking around, they end up finding a green crate that's tucked behind some hay bales. And inside of the crate, they found adult diapers, a bag containing bondage clothing and restraints, a roll of white clothesline, latex gloves, clear plastic bags containing women's lingerie and clothing, a piece of duct tape with straw, hair, and other debris stuck to it, brown rope, white socks, and a bag for storing an air mattress, along with a pink sex toy. So obviously, this is shocking to law enforcement, shocking to anybody. It is so creepy. I mean, why the fuck does he have these items? I mean, this freak literally kept Ziploc baggies stuffed with women's underwear and lingerie, and he had it all labeled and organized. It's just, it's so beyond creepy. And when they found this, James, of course, goes into full defense mode. He tries explaining to them that he had all of these items because he had a bunch of different girlfriends and he liked giving out underwear and lingerie and different items to all of them, which obviously wasn't true. I mean, look at the guy. But also, come on, no one has labeled little bags like this. It's a clear attempt at a cover-up of what he was actually doing. And by this point, the search warrant had been secured, so it was game over for James Worley. Now, in addition to the women's clothing found in that green crate, investigators also found a freshly made sandwich tucked in there as well, and of course, they're thinking that this meant Sierra could still be alive and possibly somewhere nearby. So they tore that barn and the rest of his property up trying to find her. And at one point, they thought they did. Inside the barn, investigators uncovered a piece of plywood on the ground, and it had what looked to be breathing holes cut out of it. And when they lifted it up, they didn't find Sierra, unfortunately, but they did find something very disturbing. Under the plywood, a chest freezer had been lowered into a hole in the ground, and that freezer had been secured shut with a ratchet strap. And when they opened it, they found that it had been lined with blood-soaked carpet and smelled very strongly of bleach. Now, by this point, James had been brought into the station for questioning, and when they asked him about this freezer, of course, he said he had an explanation. And that explanation is that this is where he kept his weed. Right? Because everyone who partakes in the ganja knows that you've got to keep it in a underground freezer covered with plywood, right? Okay, ridiculous. But anyway, their discoveries didn't end there. Back in the barn, they also found an air mattress, duct tape, zip ties, handcuffs, handcuff keys, more rope, and more adult diapers. So basically, everything a person would need to commit an incredibly heinous crime. Then, inside of his machine shop, they found his motorcycle, which later tested positive for blood, more adult diapers, 2 sets of handcuffs with keys, a zip tie, and a bottle of bleach. And then this is also really disturbing, but they ended up finding a nanny cam. And I'm not sure if any footage was recovered from that. That hasn't been revealed, but just the idea of him having one of those is very, very, beyond scary. And then there was a search of his 2 trucks as well. In his red truck, they found a can of pepper spray in the driver's side door pocket, a black ski mask, work gloves, an ear warmer, a roll of duct tape, and 7 24-inch zip ties which had already been connected, meaning that he pre-started those zip ties, making it easy for him to quickly tighten them. Then in his green truck, they found a white rope that was bundled with black electrical tape and again, zip ties under the driver's side seat and under the floor mat of the driver's seat. And then inside his house, there were yet again more adult diapers and then also a pair of black boots that were caked with mud. But despite all of this sick and disgusting, very obvious evidence, James, of course, says he can explain it. He says that all of it is for his new adult film company. Yeah, he actually tried to sell that story. He said it's definitely not for kidnapping and killing, which is honestly so offensive, right? Like, really, you're caught having all of this and you're still going to try and lie? I mean, give it up, dude. The jig is up, okay? You're done. And plus, investigators had uncovered video surveillance from outside of Evergreen High School that showed a truck driving towards the scene of the abduction on the night of the 19th. And as you can probably guess, it looked a whole lot like James's truck. So the thinking was maybe this was him returning to the scene to go back and pick up Sierra, because if you think about it, he likely could not have abducted her on his motorcycle. So they thought maybe he incapacitated her, then hit her in a cornfield, went back home, got his truck, and then went back to pick her up. And you guys, when James was shown the video of the truck passing by the school, he fully admitted, oh yeah, that was me. But of course, he had some bullshit story about how he was going back to get his helmet. But yeah, this idiot once again just placed himself at the crime scene. And luckily, at this point, they had enough to go ahead and place him under arrest. And you will not believe, or maybe you will, what this monster had to say when they arrested him for abduction. He said that he wanted his own room so that he could get a good night's sleep that night. Like anyone gives a fuck about your sleep. I mean, after what he did, he deserves to go to sleep and never wake up. And stick around because that might just be happening. After his arrest, investigators were hoping that James would just man up and tell them where she was. But because we're talking about an evil person here, he admitted to nothing. And so the searches for Sierra had to continue. They spent hours and hours combing through every inch of James's property and came up empty-handed. And also there were still tons of volunteers searching in other areas and they couldn't find anything either. And of course, this is all just agonizing for the Joggin family. I mean, they didn't even know who James Worley was. They had never heard of him, but now they are hearing his history and, hearing that he has a history of abducting women in the past. And this sicko is likely the one who took Sierra from them. I mean, it was excruciating. An anonymous $100,000 reward was posted for information leading to Sierra's whereabouts, but in just a few hours, they realized that she would not be coming home safely because that very same day that James was arrested for her abduction, her remains were found. That day, a volunteer was driving south on County Road 7 in an effort to help look for Sierra when he noticed a disturbance in the cornfield. So he got out of his car to check it out, and after walking 20 to 25 yards into that field, he spotted a patch of dirt that looked like it had been disturbed, almost like someone had dug that hole and then filled it back in with dirt. But after law enforcement came and dug it up themselves, it was empty, which was discouraging, but they felt like they were close to finding something. That same guy had found a yellow latex glove sort of between the road and the cornfield, and while they didn't find her body near there, they figured it had to be connected. So they fanned out, and that's when they found it. It was another mound of disturbed dirt that looked like a hole had been dug and filled back in. And this time, the hole wasn't empty. It took 5 hours in the 95-degree heat, and law enforcement literally had to use little hand shovels to get to it. But throughout the night, they had been able to uncover Sierra's body. The idea of her laying in that grave any longer was unbearable to them, so they were willing to work as long as it took to get her out, even if it was the middle of the night. And this is just a beyond disgusting detail, but they also found human feces nearby. Human feces, meaning this sicko, as if everything else he did to her wasn't bad enough, he had the audacity to take a shit near her grave. And just wait until you hear the condition that he left her in. And full warning, this is very disturbing. I debated not even sharing it, but I know you guys will want to know. And it's important to know the facts here and know the reality of what James did to her. So here it is. In that shallow grave, Sierra was found hogtied and handcuffed, wearing only an adult diaper and a lacy bra. Again, this is very disturbing, but a rubber dog toy had been placed in her mouth and tied around her head using a shoelace. And after her autopsy was conducted, a medical examiner determined that her cause of death was asphyxiation. When that dog toy was put in her mouth, it restricted her ability to breathe. And they say it would have taken her 10 excruciating minutes to lose her life. And what's even worse, they said that that toy had been shoved in her mouth so violently that it actually had broken one of her teeth. The autopsy also revealed that Sierra had suffered a wound to the right side of her forehead, a hairline fracture at the left occipital bone, and several contusions on her left leg. And so based on these horrific injuries and all the evidence that they had found so far, they were able to paint a better picture of what they believe happened to her, which was that while riding her bike, Sierra was struck by James on his motorcycle. And after that, he proceeded to strike her in the head with his helmet enough times to make her lose consciousness. He then moved her deep into the cornfields, where he left her while he rode his motorcycle back home to retrieve his truck, which he then drove back to the scene to collect her body. The autopsy did not find any signs that she had been essayed. But that's not to say that this crime wasn't sexual in nature, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but investigators determined that there was semen on a blanket found inside his barn, as well as data from his computer showing that he had been watching porn for hours leading up to her abduction. So while he may not have violated her physically in that way, they do believe that it was a sexually motivated attack. Now, going back to the night that she was found, Sierra's loved ones actually were all together when that call came in. And her stepdad, Matt, answered the phone, and he didn't even have to say anything for everyone in the room to know what he had learned. There were a collection of screams and sobs that nobody in that room will ever forget. Her mom says it sounded like wolves howling at the moon, and everyone collectively wept out of sadness and anger. There was a very small, very, very small sense of relief in the fact that at least now they knew where she was. But of course, along with that came the knowledge of the horrors that she had endured at the end of her life. A candlelight vigil was held in her honor on the 30th at the University of Toledo, which was organized by a friend of Sierra's from college. It was attended by her friends, family, members of her business sorority, and even complete strangers who just wanted to show their support. I think one thing that really rings true when it comes to this case is how the community really came out and supported Sierra and her family during this time. And I wanted to show my support too. And so on behalf of this channel today, I will be making a donation to the Justice for Sierra nonprofit. This nonprofit was started by her Aunt Tara in an effort to help protect other Ohioans. And they've already done some really incredible work. For starters, they were able to pass a bill known as Sierra's Law, which, quote, established a database accessible to both law enforcement and everyday citizens, enabling them to identify the presence of violent offenders in their neighborhoods. And then they also host an annual Spirit of Sierra run, which I love. It's a 5K run and fundraiser that takes place at the University of Toledo campus. And it's a color run, which is so fun. And it's supposed to be a lighter day, one of happiness that truly honors Sierra's life and her legacy, and they honor her in a way that she would have loved. It also helps raise money for the nonprofit, which they use to fund programs such as Sierra Strong, which is yet another cool thing that this family is doing. The Sierra Strong program is a self-defense program for students that they have turned into a curriculum to be taught in schools. The program is taught annually to students in middle school and high school, and it seeks to empower them to be self-aware and learn how to better protect themselves in the event that they are attacked. And then they also host these community events where they teach self-defense, and they provide parents with something that they call a kid print ID. And this is so genius. A kid print ID is a laminated card for parents that includes vital information about their children, such as their height, their weight, their hair color, eye color, as well as a copy of their fingerprint. And the point of it is, if your child goes missing, then parents can give this card to police very easily so they can quickly disseminate the information to the public. There's even info on the back of these cards so parents know exactly what steps to take in the event that their child goes missing. I'm just so impressed and proud of everything that they're doing in the wake of all of the tragedy that they have been through themselves, trying to do something to help other parents who could end up in a situation like this and teach kids how to defend themselves. I mean, it's so much great, vital work. And I think it's just amazing. So if any of you are interested in learning more about it or maybe making a donation yourself, I'll be sure to link their website in the description box or the show notes if you are listening to the podcast version of the show. But now let's jump back into the case and the road to justice, which took about 2 years. After Sierra's remains were found, James Worley was officially charged with her murder. And in total, he would end up being indicted on 19 felony counts, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of abduction, 4 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of possessing criminal tools, 1 count of gross abuse of a corpse, 1 count of tampering with evidence, and 2 counts of having a weapon while under disability. And this sicko, no shock here, but he pleaded not guilty to everything despite the literal mountain of evidence they had against him. So let's get into the trial and go over again what that evidence was. James's trial began in March of 2018, and when this good-for-nothing, evil, ugly loser walked into the courtroom, he had the nerve to have this poor me sort of look on his face, which was just so offensive to the Joggin family, as if being in the same room as this sicko wasn't traumatizing enough for him to be walking around acting like the victim here. I would just be so infuriated. It would take everything in me not to want to get up and punch that stupid look off his face. But of course, they can't do anything. They have to just sit there. Anyway, though, the trial begins and the prosecution's case against James is a strong one, because after processing the evidence from the crime scene and also James's house, the 2 DNA profiles came back belonging to him and to Sierra. And just to name a few things that they found it on, James's DNA was found on the male's sunglasses and the screwdriver that was found at the abduction site, also the latex glove found near her grave, some duct tape, as well as traces of his own blood on his helmet. As for Sierra's DNA at the scenes, it also came back to the yellow latex glove, as well as the women's sunglasses, the sock, the blood on the corn stalks, and of course, the helmet. As for inside the barn, they found traces of her DNA on some rope, duct tape, the air mattress, paper towels, and blood on a pair of pink underwear. They also collected swabs from James's motorcycle, and her blood was found on that as well. And despite all of that, the defense still tried to say this man was innocent. They ended up questioning a lot of the DNA, because out of all the DNA that did come back as a match to James, the DNA sample that was collected from underneath her fingernails did not. Also, remember how I mentioned earlier that that woman had thought she had seen a man in the cornfields that was wearing a red pair of shorts? Well, they never found a red pair of shorts at James's house. So they ridiculously suggested that someone else had murdered her. And to explain how her DNA got all over James's barn, they said that this strange man abducted her, snuck her into James's barn without his knowledge, and then killed her and disposed of her. Because that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Yeah, some strange man abducts Sierra on his motorcycle with his helmet, hides her in his barn, and then uses his handcuffs and ropes to tie her up and kill her. Absolutely not. I mean, the fact that they even tried to make this argument is just laughable. And the defense even tried to suggest that James couldn't have buried her on his own. So they suggested that if he did do it, maybe he had an accomplice. There had to be someone else involved, which is a pretty strange suggestion considering that their main argument was that James wasn't involved at all. So not the brightest defense team here. And of course, they wanted to make the jury believe that all that creepy stuff in his barn, all of the lingerie, the underwear, the little shorts, everything like that was innocently for his so-called adult film studio that he was about to create. They also tried to really push lack of motive. They suggested that Sierra and James didn't know each other, so he would have no motive to kill her. But obviously, that's just another stupid argument because, as we know, people kill people they don't know all the time. It's called a crime of opportunity, right? It happens quite frequently. Plus, not to mention, James went to jail for trying to abduct someone he didn't know, Robin. And speaking of Robin, she ended up very bravely taking the stand during the trial. And she had to sit there and recount and explain the worst thing that ever happened to her. But she said she did it for Sierra because she wanted to be a voice for her. She is the only living victim of James Worley, as far as we know. And she knew that the value of her testimony would be huge in this case. And to be clear, while there haven't been any other confirmed victims, one therapist said that after analyzing James, he believes he fits the profile of a serial offender. I guess he kept these journals and videos, possibly. And while we don't know the contents of these, the therapist was basically like, yeah, this guy has done this before, or at the very least is capable of doing it again. And thankfully, for every BS argument that the defense presented, the prosecution came back with an undeniable rebuttal. Plus, they'd also looked into his phone data, which literally placed him at the abduction site for nearly 2 hours on the 19th, where they were also able to trace Sierra's phone. There was no way he was trying to fix his motorcycle for that long at the same time in the same place that a brutal attack was taking place. And his phone also pinged where he buried her. I mean, come on, it's so obvious. Oh, and when they searched his computer data, that was also really disturbing. In both 2015 and 2016, he had been looking up porn categories such as hog-tied teen, bound, beaten down teens, forced teens, stranded and forced, and rough pickups. And maybe that's what floats his boat. I mean, whatever, I'm not here to kink shame or whatever, but when you look at that and then you look at the condition Sierra was found in, it looked bad. Plus, James had been buying women's lingerie wholesale. And I'm sorry, but there is no way that ugly perv had that many girlfriends that he was giving out underwear and lingerie to. I mean, come on. He had some sick sexual fantasies, and he disgustingly used these items to make that fantasy come true. And he did so at the expense of an innocent girl's life. And thankfully, the jury agreed, and it only took them 6 hours of deliberation. 57-year-old James Dean Worley, one of the most worthless humans I've ever had the displeasure of learning about, was found guilty on all 19 counts. And he didn't even flinch. He sat there completely emotionless. I mean, he didn't show an ounce of remorse at all. And a month later, he was sentenced to death. And I know people have different opinions on the death penalty. I have my own opinions, and I'm not going to break all down here today. But in my opinion, James Worley does not deserve to live his life. He does not, after what he did, literally by good night, salutations. He deserves it. I'm just so angry after learning about this case. It is so despicable. It's so disgusting. Sierra deserved so much more. And I don't even want to say person when it comes to James, because to me, he is not even a human. He is nothing but a monster, not just for what he did to Sierra, but to the other women that he has done things to. And there's probably more we don't even know about. But not just all of that. When you hear what he had the nerve to do to her family during sentencing, you're going to want to throw up. The judge ended up letting him speak, and this asshole went on a 45-minute rant about his innocence. And he cries and he talks about how Sierra lives on, and it's such bullshit. It's such an act, and it's outright offensive for him to claim that he is still the victim in all of this. Just take a listen for yourselves.
Their hearts are wounded, and they always will be. But if you believe like I believe that Sierra goes on. She may have been murdered and victimized, but she goes on.
So his execution date is set for May 20th of 2025, so it's coming up soon. Hopefully this year he will finally pay for what he did. Like a lot of families say, Sierra's family was grateful that her killer was brought to justice, but it doesn't change what happened. She will always be gone. And a guilty verdict and a death sentence will never bring her back. Her Aunt Tara said it wasn't anything to celebrate, and she's right. It's not. Sheila also expressed that over the years, one of the things that has been especially difficult is seeing her daughter's friends grow up. They're all getting married, they're having kids, and doing things that her daughter should be doing right now. But instead of celebrating her life with her, they're continuing to mourn her loss every day. They ended up filing a wrongful death lawsuit against James, which was settled in 2018 for $3.6 million. But the one thing they wanted out of that lawsuit was ownership of his property, specifically that barn. They wanted to tear that godforsaken thing down, and in 2019, they were able to do just that. Of course, it doesn't bring her home, but it does allow her family the freedom of knowing that the place that she lost her life will no longer exist, at least not in the capacity it once did. And it's so heartbreaking to think about, but if Sierra was still here today, it's likely that she and Josh would have gotten married. Who knows? They might have even had kids. But instead, Josh was left without the person that he pictured the rest of his life with. He spoke during the trial, which was, as you can imagine, incredibly emotional for everyone, and the impact that this has had on him is just undeniable. Being the last person to see her alive is a horrible weight to carry, and I just hope that he knows that he's not responsible for what happened. In somewhat positive news when it comes to Josh, he did go on to get married and have kids, and I'm so glad that he has been able to find some happiness again. And even though I'm sure he will always love Sierra, I have no doubt about that, but I am just very glad that he was able to move forward in that way. Again, I'm just really so impressed with this whole family and everything they've done to honor Sierra. Her favorite quote was actually "Live, laugh, love," and it seems that they've really adopted that into their mentality and everything that they have done moving forward. The Justice for Sierra nonprofit seems like they are making a massive difference in their community, and I can't wait to see everything that they end up doing in years to come. At the end of the day, it's just so heartbreaking to think about, someone as young as Sierra was, 20 years old, losing their life because of a monster. I mean, there was no reason for it. And like I said, I know the death penalty is very controversial, and I certainly have a lot of different opinions when it comes to it and who should get it, who shouldn't, and just kind of how I feel about it overall. And my opinion on it is constantly evolving, but I just can't think of a single reason why James should be able to continue living after what he did to Sierra. But of course, I'm curious about what you guys think, and I know opinions will vary. And so I'd love to hear from you. Do you think that he should have been given life without parole, or do you think the death penalty was fair? But that is all I have for you guys on this case. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on everything that we talked about. I know it was really long and very heavy. And again, my thoughts just truly go out to all of Sierra's loved ones, friends, family, to Josh. It's so, so horrific. And I'll never be able to make sense of why things like this happen and how people can be truly that evil. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys today. I will be back next week to discuss another case. And until then, stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Rae. It is 2025. Here we are. Cannot believe it. That number just sounds insane. Is anyone else still just living in like 2020? I mean, mentally, I feel like I'm in 2018. But anyway, welcome back. I hope you guys all had a nice holiday. And if you are new to the show, welcome. I'm happy to have you here, and make sure to click subscribe so you never miss an upload from me. So guys, today we are jumping in for the year with a case that was requested on my members only request form. And I started looking into it, and it's one of those cases where I thought it was going one way, and I was pretty confident about that. And then as I learned more and more details, it completely shifted. I don't want to give anything away, so I'm going to jump right in here, but this is definitely a case that needs more awareness. More people should know about Nicole's story and what she went through at the end of her life. It is just so tragic. Nicole seemed like an awesome person. She was a mother, and she was a great mother. And the fact that her children have to live the rest of their lives without her is, I don't even have words for that. Before I jump into her case, though, I wanted to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart who participated in our holiday matching program, raising funds for my foundation, Higher Hope. We were able to raise quite a bit, and then, of course, we matched it. And this is all going to go towards projects and grants for the upcoming year. So really appreciate that. If you are interested in making a donation, you can do so at higherhope.org. And we are super, super grateful. But let's go ahead and get into Nicole's case. And I want to start out, as I always do, by telling you more about who she was. So most of the time, Nicole went by Nikki, and she was born on March 29th, 1995 to her parents, Steve and Vicky, and she was raised just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin, alongside her 3 siblings. She had one sister, Heather, and then 2 brothers as well, Brent and Brandon, and she's been described as a very loving and incredibly intelligent person. Like I said, she's a mother. She's also a daughter, sister, and friend. And she was so, so very loved. After graduating from Denmark High School back in 2003, Nikki went on to attend the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, where she earned her bachelor's degree in both science and education. And with her degree, she was able to pursue her passion in life, which was helping others and making an impact on them. So what better career field for her to be in than education? Nikki was a teacher. She ended up becoming a substitute science teacher for the Green Bay area public school system, where she made a huge impact on so many students. And I'm sure that we can all agree from experience that the best teachers out there are the ones who truly care about the subject matter, are passionate about what they're teaching, and also passionate about their students. And that was Nikki 100%. She was the type of person that didn't just show up and do the job. She genuinely loved it. And she helped her students get excited about what they were learning about. She especially loved biology. And this was such a fun little detail to learn about her. But a friend of hers said that whenever they would go on runs together, Nikki would actually just recite the periodic table. I mean, that's how into it she was. One student said that she was the kind of teacher who actually cared about her students succeeding, and not just in the classroom, but in life. And I love that that's how she's remembered by so many. But aside from teaching, Nikki's biggest passion and greatest joy in life was definitely being a mother. She actually became a mom in a previous marriage to 2 children, a son and a daughter, and she loved her kids with every bone in her body. Family was definitely the most important thing to her, and that really reflected in every decision that she made. And since she was such an active person and loved being outdoors, loved nature, she loved doing those types of things with her kids. And so she especially loved taking them to the zoo, to the park, anything where they were going to get outside and build lifelong memories together. And those were the types of memories that she was hoping to make with her 3rd child. In January of 2015, Nikki was ready to start dating again. And like so many people out there, she wanted to find someone to share her life with. Her friends say that she was super spontaneous and that type of person who was just down for whatever. She was literally someone who would go skydiving, which is so cool. I'm so afraid of heights. I don't think I could ever do it, but it really does sound like the most incredible experience. But that's the type of person Nikki was. She was willing to take these chances, willing to experience anything in life. So when she started looking for someone to date, finding someone who's also like that was very important to her. And pretty quickly, she ended up meeting 33-year-old Doug Dietrich, who she thought might be a great partner for her. But their relationship didn't really follow the, typical timeline, because just a few weeks into dating, Nikki found out that she was pregnant. And whether or not he was ready to settle down, they had a child on the way. And so it was time for him to get serious, which he seemed to do. Nikki moved in with him, and when she had custody of her 2 older kids, they would stay there too. But he didn't really seem to be as ready for family life as he said he was. And during this episode, I'll be sharing text messages with you that will really paint that picture, make what I just said make a little bit more sense. But basically, their relationship was not a very healthy one because of the way that Doug treated her. And I will continue to break that down and what that means as we go on here. But that brings us to May 20th of 2016. It was a Friday night, and a group of Doug's friends convinced him and Nikki that they should go out with them. They had already had their son. It had actually been about 6 or 7 months since their son was born. And they were, ready for a fun night out for a change. Their other 2 kids were with their dad for the night. So in the beginning of the night, her mom watched the baby, and then eventually her friend Dallas came over and watched the baby the rest of the time that they were out. So this group of Doug's friends ended up going to this place called the Watering Hole. And it's like a bar, music hall type situation all in one. Bands will book gigs there on the weekend, and that night in particular, Steel Panther was playing. And based off what we know from the reporting on this case, that night started out completely normal. Nikki sent a selfie of her and Doug to Dallas, the friend of hers that was babysitting that night, and by everyone's recollection, everyone was doing okay. But around 11 p.m. when the band finished their set, things took a turn. As everyone is ushering out of the concert area, Nikki and Doug end up getting separated. And to some extent, I understand this. It can be very chaotic at the end of a show like this, especially in a bar scene. But instead of making any type of effort to find Nikki and go with the rest of the group to the next bar that they were going to, Doug ended up staying behind with one other friend. And he basically said that he went to the bathroom, and then when he got out of the bathroom, everyone except for this one friend was gone. And so they went to leave, but then they ended up running into some old friends and decided to stay behind and have a drink with them. And Nikki was unhappy about this because, reminder, she's out with all of his friends, and she was hurt that he just abandon her, essentially. Now, I will say that one of the other girls in the group took Nikki under her wing, which was really kind of her, but still, it seems to be the start of where things went wrong. Because while they were at this second bar, which was called the Sardine Can, Nikki started to send Doug text messages that made it clear that she was more than just a little upset. She was actually pretty damn pissed at him and even accused him of being with another woman, because not only did he not show up like he said that he would, but he wasn't even responding to her text messages. So let me just read you some of the texts that she was sending him, and it really paints a picture of where her mind was at. Wow, what slut are you with? Because none of your friends know. Fuck you, abusive asshole. And another one that said, you hurt me all the time. Now that's only 3 texts, but there's quite a lot to unpack there. And obviously, abuse is no joke, and Nikki certainly wasn't joking. In fact, I'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along here, but her friends and family did say that there was abuse in their relationship. And so that night, when Doug had ditched her, she brought it up to show him how angry she was. And it all eventually seemed to come to a boiling point when one of the girls that Nikki was with decided to call Doug herself. And she thought that maybe if she tried Doug, that he would answer and it would help the situation, but it actually didn't, because Nikki was like, why the fuck are you ignoring my calls, but you are answering from my friend? And I would certainly be pissed about that too. So at that point, Nikki decided that she had enough, and she ended up leaving the bar. There's actually surveillance footage that shows her leaving out the back gate, and you can actually see that one of the guys that she was with went after her, and he was trying to convince her to come back inside, but she wanted to leave, and he felt that he couldn't stop her. After this point, there's one call between Nikki and Doug that we know of, and he basically just tells her that he's finally on his way to the Sardine Can and will meet her there. But according to him, she was drunk and not making a whole lot of sense. And she was obviously very angry. And I guess at one point, the friend that he was with, whose name is Greg, took the phone from him and started trying to talk to Nikki himself, but said that she either hung up or that maybe her phone had died. And then after that, that was it. Nikki was never seen or heard from again. Doug says that he and Greg did drive around looking for her, but they ultimately ended up going to the Sardine Can for some drinks before finally going back home around 3 a.m. And when he got home, Dallas, the babysitter, said that she had a really weird feeling. She said that she thought it was strange that Doug came home without Nikki. And I think most of us can agree that that is pretty strange. And if I were in Dallas's shoes, I would definitely think that was extremely odd too. I guess she even jokingly asked if Nikki was in the trunk of his car. And apparently he just brushed that comment off. So she sort of just had to leave and hope that her friend made it home safely that night, but she didn't. Nikki didn't come home that night, and she didn't come home later the next morning either. And so the next day, around 4:30 p.m., Doug finally decides to go ahead and call 911 and report Nikki missing. And here is the audio from that call.
Brown County Public Safety, this is Therese.
Yes. How do I go about, missing person?
Okay, and who's missing?
It's my girlfriend, and she does live with me, and she's never done this before.
What's her name?
Nicole Vanderheiden.
Now, a few hours before Doug made that call, another older gentleman who lived just down the road from them had placed a call to 911 himself. And he called 911 because it turns out his grandson and his grandson's friends were helping him remove some stones from his field when they stumbled upon what no person, especially children, should ever have to see.
Brown County 911, what is the address of your emergency?
We just found a human body laying in some weeds.
Okay, person beyond help, or do I need to give you instructions for CPR?
No, it's beyond help. It's starting to decay.
Is it a male or a female?
It's got long hair, but I didn't go near it.
What you just heard was just a portion of the 911 call, but you heard him say that he thought the body had started to decay. But the truth is, the body hadn't even been there for a full day, and what he thought was decay was actually just severe brutality. It was so bad, in fact, that they needed dental records to make a positive identification for a body that has been there less than 24 hours. That is pretty rare. And obviously it took some time for that identification to be made, but it didn't take long for them to connect the body to Nikki. As soon as Doug had made the missing persons report, the Brown County Sheriff's Department realized that the two calls were probably connected. However, they decided not to tell Doug what they had found. At least not yet. And instead, officers went over to his house where they took an official missing persons report, and they also asked more questions to see if his description of Nikki matched their description of the body. Because besides a pair of socks and a pink, little event bracelet that was on her wrist, there was nothing on the victim's body or at the scene to make an identification. And ultimately, his description of her was a match. But they still didn't tell him because they thought the timing of his 911 call, which again was 3 hours after the first 911 call, was super suspicious. And if I were in their shoes, I would feel the same way. I mean, it's pretty suspicious when someone calls to report a body and then hours later, someone is calling to report that person missing. And of course, that doesn't always mean something suspicious happened, but in their minds, the alarm bells are going off, not to mention the fact that he waited all day to report her missing. So they loosely questioned him at his house about the events that took place the night before without letting him know what they knew.
Officer Shield arrived at Berkeley Road on May 21st, 2016, completing a missing persons report. Hi there.
Hi.
Is Doug here? Oh, okay. Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I'm here for a missing persons report. What's going on?
I haven't nobody's seen or heard from her since last night. I'd say midnight. Yeah. We were actually on the west side at the watering hole. I was on my way down there, and she was down at the sardine can with some other friends of mine. My friend Erin saw her. She was upset and walking away down south on Maple Street.
So before you even got down to the sardine can, he texted you that she just stormed off south on Maple Street. What was she mad about?
I don't know. She said I was talking to a girl. Well, I have no idea.
Were you guys drinking?
Yes. We had actually talked to her. I was called her on the way down. You actually talked to her.
I talked to her. She was mad. She was walking. She was trying to get her to tell us where she was. I thought maybe if I was talking to her instead of Doug, that maybe she would let me know where she was and let us come pick her up, so she's not just wandering the streets.
Yeah.
She didn't believe that I wasn't Doug talking to her, and she hung up.
Okay.
And then every time we tried to call her again, her phone just went to voicemail.
Did you see her walking?
No.
We drove up and down the streets for a while trying to find her, and then we went back to the sardine can thinking maybe she walked back there, and then we asked people around the sardine can if they had seen her.
Is it normal for her to sleep off being angry at you somewhere else? Is that normal?
No. Even when she's been upset with me, still will maintain contact.
She told you where she was at, but she was definitely upset at that time, thinking maybe she saw you talking to somebody.
Yeah.
Okay.
She had sent me a text saying that.
That she was upset with you?
Yeah.
Can I see the text? Why is she calling you abusive?
I don't know.
Now, the point of recording that conversation, which obviously they're recording pretty much everything these days anyway, but it was helpful for them to go back and try and review his body language. And honestly, they felt like he was acting pretty nonchalant for a guy whose girlfriend and mother of his child is missing. And so later that night, they end up asking him to come in for questioning, where he explains in more detail the sequence of events that happened the night before.
What time do you leave the watering hole then?
I didn't leave. I'm guessing around midnight-ish. A little after. I was pretty intoxicated at that point, and Greg was driving. He was sober, so he was driving.
And then did the whole group did you guys have a plan where you all were going to go?
We kind of did, yeah. We had talked about everybody. Right after the show, I went and got in line for the bathroom. It was a long line, and then I couldn't find anybody. I talked to Greg, and then I ended up calling Nikki and saying she was in the car with my friends already. She said Crystal and Aaron and Darcy and whoever else was in that car. So I didn't run out there. I said, okay, I'll meet you at the sardine can. So, and then when Greg and I were walking out, we ended up running into some good high school friends that we hadn't seen in a long time and got chit-chat with them probably 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes.
But before you left and before you ran into those high school friends, you spoke to Nikki on the phone?
Yep.
Okay. And she was in the
car.
She said she was in the car with the other friends?
Yep. And headed towards going to the sardine camp. And she was upset at me thinking that I was talking to a girl and whatever, and
What did she say?
who are you talking to? I said, I don't know if I even told her it was Katie or whatever. There's a lot of people and so commotion in there, so it was a relatively short conversation.
Okay, so then you talked to Katie and whoever's with her, and for about 20, 30 minutes, so we're looking at what now?
I guess in about midnight or so, a little after midnight, I left the watering hole.
Okay.
And because I remember when we had that conversation, I called Nikki on the way when we were driving. Greg was driving. We're going down Belt, and he was calling. And then he took the phone from me because she was kind of hysterical and drunk and irrational, not making any sense, and just kind of yelling at me. And she said, "Oh, let me try to talk to her." And then she said that's when she was walking. So that's when we were driving.
Did she tell you where you were at, where she was at that time?
Not on the phone.
Okay.
And
you just assumed she was with the group at the sardine.
No, that's when she said she was walking at that time.
Okay.
So and she told Greg that she was walking. So and we were like, where are you? We'll pick you up. Where are you? And she wouldn't say. And then Greg said he didn't know if she just hung up on him or the phone died. So and then we just kept on going there, and we drove around in the area looking for her a little bit before we went into the sardine can.
Okay.
And we asked a few people in there, if we had seen Nikki and where she went. I was just thinking she was kind of mad at me and pulling a little stunt at this point.
And then after that, he starts trying to explain why he waited so long to report her missing, which was basically that he thought she was upset and pulling a stunt and that she would be home in the morning. But then when she didn't come home and when none of her loved ones had heard from her, that's when he got worried and made that call.
Has any of those other friends called you today? The group?
Well, I haven't had my phone since basically, sitting there feeding Dylan. I woke up and then think maybe she was just pulling a stunt, not coming home, and the second time I went back to sleep with Dylan and then woke back up when he was hungry again and was feeding him, and I started getting a little more worried and okay, then I contacted her sister. It was afternoon, and then as the time progressed, I contacted Dallas, who was the other sitter that night at my house, and that's one of her really good friends, and she hadn't heard from her, and I just started getting more worried. And then Heather was working, and she was contacting a few people, and people getting back to me, and then at about 4 o'clock it was, I started to get real worried, and that's when we decided to call the police and go with the report.
Now, by this point, the body being found was no longer a secret. Doug had found out, her friends and family had found out, and they found out because it was reported on the news. So it wasn't something investigators could continue to hide. But what loved ones didn't know yet was if it was her body. Obviously, they're concerned that that could be a possibility, but they didn't know for sure. Investigators, though, felt pretty certain, which is what they told Doug.
Well, I think what we're looking at is this body that was found down the street. I don't think it's been 100% identified as her, but there's a lot of similarities.
What do you mean a lot of similarities?
The physical description, height, blonde, belly button ring.
What happened?
Well, I don't know.
That's what we're trying to figure out here.
That's what we don't know. So they're still out there processing that scene where that body is.
Yeah, I saw that on the news.
Okay.
Now, at certain points through the interview, Doug began crying and saying that he wanted her back and that she needs to come back, and he did seem to show some genuine emotion. It's pretty heartbreaking to watch back.
You're scared?
I want her back. She needs to come back. I need help with the talent.
I'm sure you'll get plenty of help with Dylan.
But obviously, you never know if someone is just putting on an act, and there are different ways to grieve, and So often we judge interrogation footage and assume that someone is just putting on that act when that may or may not be the case. And so even with that emotion, investigators thought that he may be the one who's responsible for Nikki's murder. So during that interview, they told him that a search warrant had been written and that officers were on their way to his house to execute that search right now. And when it came to this, Doug didn't seem at all worried. He even assured them that they wouldn't find anything. However, when that search was executed, they did end up finding several things that appeared to be suspicious. For starters, one thing that investigators were looking for was a pair of shoes that had some type of zigzag pattern on the bottom. And that's because Nikki's body, when it was examined, they had found zigzag marks on her back that looked like it was from somebody's shoe. And so based on these injuries, it was believed that whoever this victim was had been violently and repeatedly stomped on. So of course, they wanted to see if maybe Doug owned a pair of shoes that matched those markings. And guess what? He did. The shoe not only looked like it had a similar zigzag pattern, but they also ended up finding what looked like a drop of blood on the bottom of one of them. So that was one seemingly big finding. And then they also found what appeared to be blood in Nikki's car, along with what they described as drag marks in the garage. Now, inside of their house, there didn't appear to be any signs of a struggle, but they did locate bloody tissues as well as blood on the sleeve of a jacket. And all things considered, of course, this can't be ignored. So of course, they end up collecting swabs of all of the blood and the blood-like stains that they had found and sent them off to the crime lab for testing. And obviously, they had to wait for those to be processed, but in the meantime, there was a major break in the case. Just that next morning, blood-stained clothing was found on a freeway on-ramp, not far from where Nikki's body was left. And so they could pretty much now confirm that it was in fact her body because along with the clothing, they also found Nikki's school district lanyard and ID. And like I said, they already pretty much believed it was Nikki, but this was further proof. And that wasn't the end of their findings. That morning, two joggers were just out for a run and they happened to come across what can only be described as the crime scene. And it was only 118 feet from Nikki and Doug's house. There was an area on the concrete road where several pools of dried up blood were found. And the guy who lived in the house right in front of it reported that while he was mowing his lawn, he ended up running over a black charging cord, which was significant because Nikki's body showed obvious signs of ligature strangulation. And when her autopsy was finished, they confirmed that strangulation and blunt force trauma were the causes of her death. In total, the medical examiner determined that she sustained 241 injuries. Think about that, 241. That's really, really hard to wrap your mind around. That's just beyond inhumane. And not only that, there were also signs that Nikki had been sexually assaulted. And I don't even know what to say. I'm just so sad for Nikki's friends and family. It's just terrible thinking about what she went through in the final hours of her life. And of course, when they found out, it was just unbelievably painful. They were confused and angry. And, none of them wanted to believe that the body was Nikki's, but now it was confirmed. It was her. Now, luckily, Nikki and her loved ones do end up getting justice in this case. I'm very happy to be able to say that. And while getting justice will never bring her back and it will never take away their pain, I do hope that it at least brought them comfort. When it came to getting justice, though, I don't think it played out how anyone expected it to be. So let's get into that. So after all of the DNA at the crime scene came back as a match to Nikki, investigators began painting a picture, which was a picture where Doug was guilty of her murder. They hadn't gotten anything back from the crime lab at this point, but they believed that they had enough probable cause to support an arrest. And so just 2 days after her body was found, Doug Dietrich was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. And in those 2 days, they looked deeper into text messages between Doug and Nikki, as well as Doug and his mom, and it painted a pretty nasty picture. Bottom line is their relationship was not in a good place in multiple ways. And Doug had even texted his mom and told her that he was even thinking about asking Nikki and the kids to move out. And so to investigators, It's looking like a motive. They thought that he exaggerated his concern for her disappearance and even suggested that he wasn't honest about how hard he looked for her that night. On top of that, they looked into his record and found out that an ex accused him of abuse, and at one point, he was even arrested because of it. Those charges did end up being dropped, but of course, they're not going to ignore what she had told them. Plus, both Nikki's mom and sister spoke to detectives and said that Nikki confided in them about being abused by Doug. And to clarify, they were talking about physical abuse. And so all of this is just adding to the narrative, to the picture that they were already starting to paint about who Doug was and how he could have been involved in her murder. I mean, it would make a lot of sense, and I can't necessarily blame them. It certainly looked that way. It was just speculation, but investigators thought that at some point that night, Nikki was offered a ride by someone, and then when she returned, maybe Doug was still awake and freaked out on her. They had some type of altercation where things ended badly. They believe it started outside where all that blood was found, and then eventually maybe he dragged her into the garage and put her into her own car. And then from there, he drove her to the dump site and then just went back home. But there was an issue with that theory, though, because it meant that one other person would have seen Nikki in those final hours, whoever had given her a ride home, and whoever that person was hadn't come forward. But even though they didn't know who that person was, that didn't stop them from going ahead and arresting the man who they thought was responsible. But you guys, as you probably can tell from the way I'm speaking about this, Doug was innocent. Less than 2 weeks after Doug was arrested, the results came back from the crime lab, and they disproved the investigators' theory completely. So let me break this down for you, starting with the male DNA that was found in 16 places on Nikki's body as well as on that cord. Even though it was just partial DNA, it was not a match to Doug. Then, of course, we have the shoe, the one with the zigzag print on the bottom that Doug did own a pair just like that. Well, for starters, the results came back as inconclusive when it came to that zigzag pattern, meaning they couldn't prove or disprove whether that shoe was a match to the shoe that was used to stomp on Nikki's body. And then, of course, there was the drop of blood found on Doug's shoe. Well, turns out it wasn't even human blood. It was turkey blood from when Doug had previously gone hunting. And then as for the drops of blood in Nikki's car, turns out it was her daughter's. And then the blood on those tissues and jacket were actually from her sister, who was recently at their house and had had a bloody nose while she was there. Then it turns out that Nikki's car had never left the garage that night, and they were able to figure that out because Nikki had Progressive Snapshot, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, especially if you have Progressive or if you've seen the ads for it. It's basically like a device that you hook up in your car, and it tells the Progressive insurance company how well you're driving. And through that data, they could see that her car did not move all night. And if all that wasn't enough, get this. Remember when I talked about how when they went to Doug's house, they were recording his conversation so that they could review his body language later on? Well, it turns out when they reviewed that footage, they saw that Doug was wearing a Fitbit. And this is not the first case where I have either covered or heard of this happening, but the Fitbit ended up playing a huge part in the case, and it actually helped prove that he didn't commit her murder. Isn't that crazy? When they ended up looking at his Fitbit data, it showed that there were only about 12 steps in the 3-hour span where they believed that Nikki was murdered. And of course, you might be thinking, well, maybe he took it off. Maybe he thought ahead on that one. Well, they don't believe he did, because if he did, it wouldn't have even registered those 12 steps. Those 12 steps he took, which they believe were probably from where he maybe went to go to the bathroom or to check on their kid, proved that he was wearing the device throughout the time that they believe that she was murdered. And so ultimately, they did not have enough evidence to keep him behind bars any longer. So after 18 days, Doug was released. But with the exception of his friends, most people still thought he was guilty, and they couldn't understand why they were letting him out. And what was even harder to understand was the fact that weeks started going by and it didn't seem like anything was happening with the case. But there was. Earlier in this episode, I told you guys how Nikki was found only wearing her socks and a pink bracelet, like the event bracelet. And it turns out that there was some DNA found on her socks. And when they ran this DNA through CODIS, it came back as being a match to 38-year-old piece of shit George Stephen Birch. And it turns out his DNA would end up being a match to all other DNA found on Nikki and the murder weapon. But who was this guy? Well, when investigators first looked into him, they could see that he was from Virginia and didn't appear to have any connection to Nikki whatsoever. So how did this random dude's DNA end up on her sock? Well, if you haven't already figured it out, it's because this good-for-nothing shitbag murdered her. It turns out that George was new to the Green Bay area. He had just moved there a few months earlier after going through a divorce. He ended up moving in with his buddy Ed Jackson and Ed's wife, Linda, who he had been friends with for over 20 years. And the thing that interested investigators the most about him was the fact that on his record, it showed that he had already been arrested for murder. Back in 1998, he was arrested for the murder of a man named Joey White, who was supposedly a rival gang member. A jury did end up acquitting George, but investigators felt like this wasn't a coincidence, so they kept looking into him, and this is what they found out. George, whose nickname is actually Big Country because he's 6'8", was a regular at this bar called Richard Cranium's, which happens to be a half-mile away from the sardine can. Investigators also learned that he had recently been associated with a hit-and-run incident. I'm talking like right after the murder. And what happened was the Jacksons had let George borrow their Chevy Blazer, and one night that vehicle was involved in a hit-and-run. And on top of being super banged up, whoever was driving the car also decided to torch it. And naturally, the police suspected George was involved since he was the person known to drive the vehicle. But of course, he said it wasn't him and that someone else had stolen it. Now, they didn't end up charging him with anything since they couldn't prove that he did it, but the whole ordeal ended up really being a golden ticket in Nikki's murder investigation. It turns out when police brought him in for questioning over that whole ordeal, he ended up giving them written permission to download the data from his phone. And he did this because he thought it would prove that he wasn't near the area where the hit and run took place. But what big dummy dumbs didn't even factor in was the fact that now police had access to everything. And so, to make a long story short, investigators got a hold of the data, and it proved that George was at every single location associated with Nikki's murder on the night it happened. So if the DNA wasn't already a slam dunk, this certainly was. The data ultimately showed that he drove from Richard Cranium's to his house, where he stopped briefly, then from his house to Nikki's house, and lastly from Nikki's house to the field where her body was dumped. It also placed him on the highway on-ramp where her clothes had been discarded. And if all that weren't bad enough, this Bigfoot-looking ass had been dumb enough to be Googling the case. Not once, not twice, 64 times. Okay, so things are not looking good for Mr. George. So of course, they arrest him, and they ultimately believe that on the night that she was killed, Nikki had met George at Richard Cranium, and while the specific details are uncertain, they think that he had offered her a ride home. And during this ride home, they believe that he tried to make a move on her sexually, which they believe that she denied. And because she denied him, he sexually assaulted and killed her. That day, he was brought in for questioning, and George could not have been more casual about the whole thing. He straight up sat in that room smoking a cigarette and smiling, like he hadn't just been arrested on suspicion of murder. And unfortunately, not much more information was learned. George answered a handful of personal questions, but when the detective started talking about the murder and reading him his Miranda rights, he asked for a lawyer.
So obviously you're brought here in handcuffs, right? Which means you're arrested, so you have the right to your Miranda rights. Are you familiar with those rights at all? Okay, so before I speak to you any further about my investigation, I want to read your Miranda rights and see if you're willing to talk to me, okay? The reason you're here is in reference to a homicide investigation into Nicole Vanderheiden, okay? So is this something that you want to talk to me about?
Yes, sir.
What's that? You don't want to talk to me about that? So if I read your Miranda rights, you don't want to talk to me?
Yes, I would prefer a lawyer.
And honestly, even though he didn't end up saying much at the time, I'd say it was kind of a good thing because it gave this dummy time before the trial began to concoct a ridiculous story that no one was going to believe. The trial started in February of 2018, and I'll explain this more in a minute, but basically the fact that he didn't tell his whole concocted story from the jump just proved that everything he was saying was complete bullshit. So let's start going over the trial, shall we? The trial against George, specifically, it began on February 19th, 2018, and no time was wasted getting into the nitty-gritty details. The prosecution argued that George undeniably murdered Nikki Vander Heiden and that the evidence proves that it was him and him alone. And just as a reminder, I thought it would be good for us to go over once again all of the evidence against him, and there's quite a bit. First, there was the phone data, which placed him at every single location associated with Nikki's murder. And then they had his DNA on both her body and the cord that they say he strangled her with. And then they also had the testimony of Ed Jackson. And he explained during that testimony that the day after Nikki was murdered, he and George went out fishing. Like, can you imagine doing something that heinous and then waking up the next morning and going fishing? And there's even a photo of George smiling as he's holding up a fish that he caught. And he looks totally unfazed, totally happy, just showing off his stupid fish. And that photo, plus the testimony of Ed, ended up helping the prosecution because it showed that George didn't have any injuries to his head, which I'm sure you're a little confused on that, and I will explain more after I go over the defense's argument. So the entire, and I mean entire, strategy of the defense was to convince the jury that Doug had been the one to kill Nikki. And I'm sure you're already thinking that's a terrible argument, and it is, because obviously they have all this physical evidence against George, plus they have plenty of evidence to prove that Doug is innocent, but they said they could explain it somehow. According to George, who did take the stand, by the way, he was with Nikki that night. He said that they met at Richard Cranium's and the two of them began flirting, and eventually he asked if she wanted to go home with him. He claims that she said yes, and that the two of them got in his car and drove to his place. But then he said when they pulled up, other people were home, so they decided to go to Nikki's instead. And when they go to Nikki's, same situation, people are home. Duh. So he claims then that they decided to have sex in the back of his car. But here's the kicker. Out of nowhere, George claims that he was knocked out and completely lost consciousness. Then when he suddenly came to, he said he saw a man who he heard say, "Don't you fucking think about it," as well as, "Look what the fuck you made me do." And when he did come to, he said that Nikki was already dead. So yeah, that was his story that he felt good about, that he just happened to be unconscious for all of this. Okay, but even if the jury was foolish enough to believe all of that bullshit, he still had to explain why his phone placed him at the location where her body was dumped. So what did this big idiot say? He said that Doug forced him at gunpoint to move Nikki's body to the back of his car and then proceeded to hold that gun against him as the two of them drove her body to the field where he was forced to dump her. Now, apparently, this entire time, George was trying to come up with a way to escape the situation, and he said he got that opportunity in the field when Doug wasn't paying attention. He said that he pushed Doug down as hard as he could, and then he ran as fast as his little legs could carry him, I guess big legs, and drove off. And while driving away, he noticed that Nikki's clothes were still in his car. So he threw them out his window in a panic. And I mean no offense to Doug when I say this, but George looks like he could eat Doug. I mean, he was called Big Country for a reason. He is a 6 foot, 8 inch, 260 pound behemoth. And Doug is kind of a regular looking dude. He's not tiny or anything, but George is certainly a lot bigger than him. Obviously, you have to take into account that if his story was true, the person holding the gun does have more power, but I don't know why I'm just so hung up on that. It just seems like one other element to his story that just fundamentally doesn't make any sense. And that's why it's so ridiculous he even tried to sell this to the jury. He didn't even mention any of this to investigators when he was arrested. But all in all, that was the gist of his testimony. And the fact that he even testified in his own defense was pretty shocking. I mean, that does not happen often. Now, Doug also took the stand, and the defense went in on him. They brought up the text messages where Nikki alleges he abused her and the fact that he was planning on leaving her and their son, you know, things that would point to a motive. But he denied all of those allegations and even said that he didn't know why Nikki would say those things in the first place. They also did question why it took him so long to report her missing, and I certainly have thoughts on that and on Doug in general and the way he treated her. I don't feel great about him, and I'm sure any of you can agree, but while it's frustrating he did wait so long, definitely wouldn't have changed the outcome. Plus, let's not forget about the Fitbit that did play a big role in clearing him. How could he have committed a violent murder and dumped a body and only have taken 12 steps? I mean, the logic just, isn't there. The reality is Nikki's life was taken from her. And while Doug definitely has his own can of worms, he wasn't guilty of murder, which is the same conclusion that the jury did end up coming to. And both the prosecution and the defense thought that they would take quite a bit of time, but they didn't really need much time at all. After a 2-week trial, they only took 4 hours to deliberate, and they came back with a guilty verdict. And 2 of the jurors ended up telling reporters that their decision really just came down to one thing, and that was the wire cord. That cord, which was used to strangle Nikki, only had one man's DNA on it, and that was George. And at sentencing a few weeks later, 19 letters were submitted to the judge asking that he punish him for as long as the law would allow. And that's exactly what the judge did. And I really, really like this judge. I mean, I don't know his whole career, but from the way that he handled this case, I thought he did a great job. He sentenced George to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and even told him that if he could, he would sentence him to the death penalty. The death penalty isn't legal in Wisconsin, so he couldn't, but he did say that he believed that this crime warrants that sentence.
But what complicates things so is not only did you just brutally murder her, but you took away her life, and then you kind of tried to take away her reputation by this story of sex in the car. And I agree with Mrs. Dietrich. The easy out would have just been, I'm not going to fight. And she did fight. She had honor. You took that away from her.
And essentially, he said something along the lines of, I'm giving you the death penalty in a way because you're going to die in prison, where you belong. He was also ordered to pay about $37,000 in restitution to the family and Doug for wage loss, headstone engraving, burial costs, counseling, and more. And despite everything, what really pisses me off, like the cherry on top of this evil man, is that he continues to maintain his innocence, and he says that he'll never confess in a million years. I don't even know how to put into words how evil you have to be to not give her friends and family that closure. I mean, this is a mother of children that are going to grow up without her. One of them who was too young to even have any memories of her. And you couldn't just own up, be a man at the end of the day and admit to what you did, confess, give them that type of closure. I guess you can't really expect a monster like George to have the heart to do that, but still, it just makes me so angry. So this is normally the part of the episode where I would start to wrap things up, but I do have one more piece of information that I want to share, and it actually has to do with charges that were filed against Doug. I've obviously said that Doug is innocent, and he is innocent of murder. However, after Nikki was murdered, he was charged with reckless endangering of safety, disorderly conduct, as well as false imprisonment, which had to do with an incident that took place after Nikki was killed, but before George's trial. And this is very shocking and disturbing, but what happened was Heather, Nikki's sister, had been living at their house helping with the baby after Nikki was murdered. And a year before the trial, in February of 2017, the two of them were driving to a birthday party. And, well, Doug ended up touching Heather's knee in a sexually suggestive way, and when she denied this advance, he locked the car doors and took off speeding. And it was a very bad, very scary situation. He ran a red light and completely put her in danger, and he only stopped when she started kicking at the windshield to try and break free, as if she hadn't been through enough recently. So another trial for that incident was scheduled for August of 2018, but he ended up pleading no contest to misdemeanor negligent operation of a vehicle, and if he stayed out of trouble by the agreed upon date, the charges would be dismissed, which, to my knowledge, they did ultimately end up being dismissed. So yeah, Doug might be innocent of murder, but according to everything we know about him, he does not seem like an upstanding citizen by any means. I mean, to do this to the sister of someone you loved, someone who was murdered, the mother of your child, so soon after what happened to her, pretty evil, in my opinion. Nikki, her sister, their whole family deserves so much better. And really just at the end of the day, my heart breaks for those kids. I mean, the fact that if they don't already know what happened, they probably will learn what happened in their life. It's just beyond traumatic. I was curious how they're doing now, and I struggled finding any recent updates on how they're doing, but I did see that a fundraiser was started to help the family financially support their kids through life in college. It's a GoFundMe, and like always, I'm going to have that link down below in case you're in a position to be able to support them. And I'm going to attempt to get in touch with them and see if they're interested in applying for a grant through my foundation, Higher Hope, because we definitely would love to help them. But even though years have passed now, this will never be over for her family, especially for those 3 children who will forever have to grow up without their mother. How someone could just be in the wrong place at the wrong time and just happen to ask the wrong person for a ride, it's so unfair. Nikki deserved so much better, and George Birch got exactly what he deserved, which is rotting in prison until the day he dies. But that is all I have for you guys on this case today. I definitely want to hear your thoughts, so let me know, and I will be back next week. But until then, stay safe out there.